The nation's most impressive Easter demonstration. 75,000 massed before Lincoln Memorial to hear Marian Anderson, colored contralto, make her capital debut at the great Emancipator Shrine. Refusal of the DAR to let her use their hall fanned a countrywide controversy, with this great gathering as the climax. The singer was invited by Secretary of the Interior, Ickes, who attends with Secretary of the Treasury, Morgenthau. Spectators include Supreme Court Justice Black, New York Senator Robert Wagner, and a host of notables. Here to listen to the voice acclaimed by many as the finest in a century.
Marian Anderson, distinguished American contralto, sings the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous flight for the rampart we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets rippling through the bursting air gave proof to the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
So we do not face a new problem today, in one sense. We face the same problem in principle that Martin faced, and faced successfully. And I would propose that in the lesson of Martin Luther King and his life, there is something we can learn today which brings him back to life as if he was standing here alive today. There's something special about his life, his development, which should be captured today by us, not only in addressing the problems of our nation, which are becoming terrible, but the problems of our relationship with the world as a whole. How are we going to deal with these cultures that are different than our own? With an Asian culture, with Muslim cultures around the world, over 1 billion Muslims around the world, with the culture of China, which is different than ours, the culture of Southeast Asia, which is different than ours, the cultural background. They're all human, they all have the same ultimate requirements, the same needs, but they're different cultures. They think differently. They respond to different predicates than we respond to. But we must have peaceful cooperation with these people to solve a world problem. Then you start thinking about someone like Martin, and I want to indicate in the context I just stated what the significance of Martin is today.
Welcome to today's symposium of the Schiller Institute. we're trying to indicate to you what the significance of Martin Luther King is for the American presidency today. We've entitled this A More Perfect Union Through the Coincidence of Opposites, Martin Luther King and the American Presidency. Lyndon LaRouche, whom you've just heard, stated that King was the most qualified person to have become president of the United States. Some would have said that that would have been impossible of the United States of that time, but they would be the same people that would say today that the present course of violent self-destruction that the United States appears to be on is also impossible to stop. A thinking response rather than an unthinking reaction can determine in our time whether not only we but the entire human race survive. It can determine whether the United States presidency, indeed the United States Constitution, survives. The solutions to an apparently insoluble problem sometimes only require thinking about that problem. For example, have either the outgoing or incoming presidential administrations suggested to the tens of thousands of troops deployed into the United States Capitol that before Wednesday, and if possible, today, they each and all visit the monument to King on the Great Mall in order to think how to best uphold and defend that Constitution that they are sworn to protect? Did either administration think to consult the unelected president on the mall? The poet Friedrich Schiller warned that great moments in history often find little people. The most perfect union that Ben Franklin's American conspiracy formed in 1776 required a war to establish a constitution, an invention unlike any other in the world. And that was done so that we might not have to do it again. Frederick Douglass, when he joined Abraham Lincoln in insisting that it was the constitutional federal republic of the United States that was primary over any other form of self-government, that took thinking. Today, one group of Americans calls the other group of Americans either domestic terrorists or communists. And troops are called out in the implicit task of protecting one group of Americans from another, as much as it will be denied that that is so. We should remember that 160 years ago, many Northern abolitionists supported secession from the Union as much as the Southern plantation owners that they opposed. Both were wrong. A confederacy of dunces is never viable. A higher principle must be invoked. It is called the coincidence of opposites. Benjamin Franklin's experiments with electricity show us a mind so governed as to be capable of thinking not only of the world as a whole, but of the nature of the universe and humanity's role in it. Universal harmony, or a more perfect union, requires thinking from the mountaintop about all of humanity, and that is true power. Composer Ludwig van Beethoven is reputed to have remarked, "If I knew as much about war as I know about music, I would then show Napoleon who is the true emperor." What would the crew of the exploded United States space shuttle, the Columbia, have thought of this scene or the impending scene in our nation's capital? They who gave their lives not only for their country, but for all humanity. They were neither black or white. They were neither immigrant or native born. They were neither blue nor red, though their shirts might seem to speak to the contrary. Both the crew of the exploded space shuttle Columbia and Beethoven are characterized by these words that were engraved on Beethoven's tombstone. "A great man's deeds continue to work upon other men's lives through the ages. So livest thou too through measureless time. Rejoice in thy eternity." And it's that perspective that we'd like you to think in terms of today when you are caused to recall the importance of Martin Luther King to us all. And the idea here is to resurrect him, Lincoln, and Ben Franklin, whose birthday we also celebrate, that was yesterday, to resurrect them from the abyss of time in favor of conceptualizing and informing our deliberations of today. I'd like to introduce, to begin our deliberations, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and her topic on beauty and the sublime will, I think, give you a way of thinking about your own destiny and the destiny of this nation in a different way. Helga?
Yes, hello. Well, I think everybody who is in this moment alive and reflects upon what we have experienced in the last days and what we are looking towards in the next days ahead probably somehow feels that this requires something out of the ordinary, that each of us has to find a way of invoking within us that higher power which you got a sense of when you listened to Marian Anderson singing, that power of beauty, that higher power of the sublime, which she got across so beautifully. Now, what we are looking at is indeed something enormous. And I think nobody in our lifetime has any reference for these incredible events which are unfolding in front of us, nor is it easy to come up with an easy recipe of how to resolve this situation, which is not just one of the United States. It affects the whole world. Now, for the inauguration day on the 20th of January, reports are that there are already or will be 25,000 troops in Washington. Now, I don't know if people have a clear understanding. That is 1.5 divisions. That is about half the size of the entire German combative army. According to retired General Mark Hertling, who gave an interview in National Public Radio, this is 4 times the size of what the United States had deployed in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan combined. And against what, or for what are these troops there? Against a so-called, quote, insurgency. And, the same General Hertling basically said that, that they are looking at the situation in the same way like they have looked at the insurgents in these countries, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Now, we have been all sort of surprised by the events on January 6th, despite the fact that there were clear warnings that there could be violent action. The security was absolutely inadequate. And, it is quite obvious that parallels can be drawn to both the Reichstagsfire in Germany, but also 9/11, which after all was the pretext for the introduction of the Patriots Act, of the consequences the whole world is still suffering today, with the total surveillance and many other aspects of it. Now, what is behind all of this? Is it just what you seem to see, or is there some story behind all of that? Well, I can tell you that there are right now massive efforts, and they are quite open. You don't need to believe in a conspiracy for that, to impose a Green New Deal on the entire Western world and possibly lure other countries such as Russia and China into it as well. Now, in the European Union, they already are introducing what they call the Green Deal. The central banks have been quite explicit that they want to have a regime change whereby all financing is only going into green investments. Now, with the Biden administration, that is what they have campaigned for. They also plan to implement the Green New Deal. Now, what is this Green New Deal? Well, there was an article just a couple of days ago by one Eric Hyman, who is the senior economist of the Deutsche Bank Research Department. And he, commenting on this Green Deal, said that he really does not like what he calls the dishonest debate by the European Union saying, what is this Green New Deal? Because it should be clear to anybody that you can only implement this by an absolutely massive reduction in the living standard, for the obvious reason that every euro and every dollar which is invested in green technology is lacking in education, in healthcare, in infrastructure. But it's not just that, it's even worse, because the root causes of the systemic crisis of 2008 were never remedied. All the central banks did in the meantime was to go for massive quantitative easing, which favored the speculators at the disadvantage of the average family and household. And as a result, the speculators became more rich, but the middle class became smaller and the poor became more. There were trillions of such quantitative easing, which have created a gigantic bubble. And this is now supposed to be the last real boom in investing in green and creating a whole new frenzy about green investment. What they are not telling people is that by only going into green energy, solar, wind, you go out of the fossil fuels, you're not investing in nuclear energy, you are reducing the energy flux density in the production process in such a way that no modern industrial nation can be maintained. Now, why is this all happening? It would be so easy to go for the alternative, which has been designed by Lyndon LaRouche for many decades. You would reconnect with Franklin D. Roosevelt's real New Deal, which included a new Bretton Woods system, a new credit system, which would address the incredible underdevelopment of the developing sector, which is the reason why we have a pandemic in the first place. You could contain COVID-19 very easily if you would have a modern health system in every country. But this is not being done. And it would be also easy to remedy the financial crisis, exactly like Franklin D. Roosevelt did it in 1933 by implementing a Glass-Steagall law, by going back to the national banking system, which was really created by Alexander Hamilton and which was just reintroduced with Franklin D. Roosevelt with the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. All of these tools would be there, and you could immediately start a reindustrialization of the United States, all the partners and allies around the world, and you could overcome the underdevelopment of the developing sector immediately. Now, why do people not respond to that? Why do they drift around, like motherless childs, like lost sheep, no orientation? Well, I think if we want to get out of this crisis, we have to start a serious reflection on what went wrong. How did we get to this horrible point? Well, Lyndon LaRouche has pointed out to where it really began, which he experienced as a young man coming back from India in this after the Second World War. And he said it was really the shift towards suburbia, where the high commitment the American people had when they fought the National Socialists, and the ideas of the American Republic was very dear in the heart of every patriot. This started to very quickly go away with the move to suburbia, with the acceleration of consumerism, the flight from reality, the TV soap operas, the entertainment, which became more banal as the years went by, having absolutely no correspondence to reality. the engagement in spectator sports, rock videos, the increasing use of drugs. In 1992, Lyndon LaRouche wrote an article when he was innocently in jail, where he said, describing the condition of the American population, that they had become absolutely insane. And that was in 92. Now, we know that that was not entirely organic. There was a lot of behavior modification. The drug use, which nowadays is almost legalized everywhere, despite the fact that there is no question about what that does to the cognitive powers of people. We know about the LSD experiments, which were done by official institutions in the United States. Then, if you look at the present condition of the population, yeah, sure, you still have some scientists who are rational. Many of them have sold their soul because the money flows only for green research. But if you look at the general population, the number of people who are rational has shrunk to a scaringly small portion. But you have a lot of people who believe all kinds of things, crazy things, conspiracy theories, mixing cause and effect, turning it upside down. There is, a very interesting article which I find absolutely fascinating. It's written by one Reed Berkowitz, a designer of games, including alternate reality games. And he said that when he looked at the phenomena of QAnon, that he found that they have all the attributes of the kinds of games he is designing, including the factor of what is called apophenia. Now, that is a notion which comes originally from psychology, and it describes a tendency to perceive connections or meaningful patterns between things which are completely unrelated or at random. And one sees clues that are not there. So he says what he recognizes in QAnon is not only apophenia, but what he calls a guided apophenia, because it is very clear that there are puppet masters who are hinting and sort of steering the often clueless victim into the desired conclusion. That they lay a trail, a kind of a breadcrumb trail away from reality, away from the solutions, and they give pseudo explanations and give the person the feeling that they have figured it all self out, and therefore they own it, and therefore they are absolutely convinced that their explanation is the right one. Now, if you look at the present extremely confused condition of the American population, I think the role of big tech, of the Silicon Valley IT firms and their control over not only the media, but also the social media, is largely responsible for the present condition of the population, not to forget Hollywood, naturally. Now, this is a subject we have to discuss in the next period much, much more, because it now turns out that these big tech companies who have decided that they are more powerful than the elected president of the United States, because they can ban him and with him 75 million Americans having access to what this president thinks, by basically putting a ban on his communication. So we better look at that, because this is something which is going to be here, and we have to somehow figure out what to do about it, because otherwise you are living in a dictatorship. Now, that is too short now to delve into more in depth. I would like to approach this question from still another angle. And that is the question, how did this America, this beautiful republic with an absolutely outstanding constitution, how did this republic, which was a beacon of hope and temple of liberty, how did it come to this point? And maybe it is of some help that I asked myself that same question many years ago. How was it possible that Germany, which produced one of the highest cultures, and I would say one of the very, very highest cultures of any nation on the planet, with the classical culture of Bach, of Beethoven, of many other classical composers, of Schiller, and many other poets, of some of the most creative scientists, discoverers, and thinkers. How was it possible that Germany could plunge to the abyss of the 12 years of National Socialism? Now, obviously, there are differences, and I'm not saying this is exactly the same, but some of the mechanisms and some of the principles are quite parallel and therefore may give a clue of how one can come from an extremely high development to, something which is almost the opposite. This is the famous question Benjamin Franklin also, prophetically addressed when he said, "I will give you a republic, but make sure you keep it." Now, what happened in Germany was that in the period of Beethoven and Schiller, they developed the up to now highest form of the classical culture, classical music, classical poetry, and that had a lot to do with the standard of the classical composition in both music and poetry, the question of the role of beauty, the role of the standard of the artist, and the idea that it is only the beauty of great classical art which makes man free. And as Schiller said in the introduction to his drama Bride of Messina, he is not talking about some outer freedom. He's talking about that inner freedom of thinking, that inner freedom which makes people free, in a sense which, is only belonging to each individual itself. Now, when Schiller when Schiller discussed the standard of what is the emotional quality of this classical art, in the writing about grace and dignity, he wrote, "Love alone, therefore, is free emotion, for her pure source flows from the seat of freedom, from our divine nature. Here is not the petty and low which mingles with the great and high, not sense which gazes dizzily aloft at the law of reason. It is the absolutely grand itself which finds itself imitated in grace and dignity and satisfied in sensuousness. It is the legislator himself, the God in us, who plays his own image in the world of sense." Now, the idea of beauty which Schiller had, and there was his big difference with Kant, for example. Kant said, that there is no way how you can define what beauty is. It's completely arbitrary. It is something which one cannot ever establish in a reasonable way. Schiller was very, very upset about that, and he developed much of his entire aesthetical theoretical works against Kant. And in the 10th of the Aesthetic Letters, he says, "The pure rational concept of beauty, if such a thing may be adduced, can be drawn from no actual case. Rather does it itself correct and guide our judgment concerning every actual case. It must therefore be sought along the path of abstraction, when it can be inferred simply from the possibility of a nature that is both sensuous and rational. In a word, beauty must be exhibited as a necessary condition of humanity. Now, that notion that beauty is a necessary condition of man, if man is to survive, is a very important idea, which Schiller developed in many of his writings. That is why he had also an extremely high standard for the artist, about whom he said that before the artist can dare to stand in front of his audience and move the audience, he must purify himself to be an ideal man, at least in that moment of performance. And I think you have seen this in Marian Anderson. The reason why she touches the heart in all this simplicity but incredible beauty is because she is such a beautiful soul in the moment she sings. She was a beautiful soul beyond that, but when she was singing, she got across this quality of the beautiful soul, which according to Schiller is a person for whom reason and freedom, passion and necessity are the same, because he has or she has educated her emotions up to the level of reason so that he or she can blindly follow these emotions, because they would never tell anything different than reason commands. Now, in the Matthison's poems, Schiller says, two qualities are therefore indispensable in every work of art: a necessary relationship to its object, objective truth, and second, a necessary relationship between that object or its description and the emotional faculties, subjective universality. Everything in a poem must be true nature, since the imaginative powers obey no other law and tolerate no other compulsion than that which is the natural order prescribed. But also nothing in a poem must be actual historical nature, since all actuality imposes some sort of restriction upon that universal natural truth. Every human being is less human to the extent that he is merely individual. Every type of emotion ceases to be necessary and purely human insofar as he remains peculiar to a particular person. Only by discarding what is accidental and by expressing unallowed necessity do we develop true greatness of style. Now, I cannot do justice to all the aspects of what constitutes true classical art. I can only say that in the 10 periods when Schiller and Goethe worked on aesthetical laws, they established something which is as universal as scientific laws. And Linda LaRouche has said many times that unless we get the population back to think that way, there is little hope that we can save civilization. Now, if you look what happened to that beautiful outlook of the German classical period, it's parallel to what happened in the United States in the political realm. And in Germany, it was the Romantic movement which started to take apart this form. It was such people, such romantics as Novalis, Friedrich and August Wilhelm Schlegel, Tieck and Fichte, who, for reasons, probably in the beginning organic, but then taken over by the restoration of Metternich, they started to absolutely take apart the classical form and replace the idea that art is only art when it is beautiful more and more with the interesting. And what is not interesting, what has been interesting today, tomorrow is boring. So it has to be more interesting. It has to be more challenging the senses, move away more from the strict thorough composition of the poetical or musical idea, go into the mixture between day and dream, not have a clear end, but go in a kind of endless soap opera. Just take anything, every form apart, introduce a little bit of ugliness because ugly is interesting. In a later phase, they even introduced the explicit cult of ugliness. And this started a long series going down all the way to the destructionist of modern art, where no standard exists anymore and everything is completely destroyed. Now, that is something we have to undo by simply reconnecting to the highest forms of classical art in all cultures which produce them. But we need something else. We need another concept which Schiller introduced, and that was his notion of the sublime. Now, Schiller developed this notion in a more incredible form than any other writer I know of, and I would actually encourage you to read the two writings by Schiller about the sublime, because it can be extremely helpful for the moment we face. Now, he discusses there how to develop this inner strength, which we, as mortal human beings who have a physical part of our existence, and that physical existence is not very strong. Any major animal, an elephant, a bear, they are stronger than human beings. So if we are threatened in our physical existence, there is not much which gives us safety. But Schiller develops this idea that if we manage to connect our deeper identity to those ideals which go way beyond our lifetime and which are connected to the higher causes of humanity, then it shifts, and the fear which comes from the threat to our physical existence sort of goes away and is replaced by a moral security. Now, in this moment where nobody knows what will happen out of this, I mean, this is an incredible danger we are facing, not only in one country, but we are really facing the danger of fascism in the same way like Hjalmar Schacht, the finance minister of Hitler, introduced fascism based on a specific economic system which used up labor force and which ended up in the last form in the concentration camps. Now, this is today takes a different form, and here is not the place to discuss it, but I think that the question how to deal with that requires this inner quality which all of us need to strengthen, which is the sublime. And the sublime and beauty are the two things which we can find in great art. And this is what combined, the great work of Marian Anderson, of Martin Luther King, which inspired Einstein. It inspired my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche. And I think that whatever we entertain in this period, we must put ourselves on this elevated level, because only if we try to live in the realm of the sublime, and if we do not allow any thoughts other than beautiful thoughts, which is identical with the idea of love and love for mankind, any other thought like rage, like being driven by the sentiments, can be manipulated and is the antidote to this inner freedom which I was talking about. And that is really what I wanted to tell you.
Thank you very much, Helga. You had a musical selection, a song composed by Franz Schubert that you wanted to have us present today, and we're about to do that. But I wondered if you could say something about what the song is and why you thought people should hear it.
Well, it's one of the really beautiful poems by Schiller, which was then composed by Schubert. It's called Longing, and you should, look at the lyrics. It's a metaphor. It talks about being in a dark valley, not knowing where the exit is from this very, very uncomfortable place. And then the mind wanders, and all of a sudden you see beautiful pictures, beautiful landscapes, golden fruits, beautiful flowers which do not die because no winter can ever hurt them. And this is a beautiful description. But then a terrible wide river comes in between, and you cannot reach these beautiful hills and mountains and flowers, and you are really totally upset. But then you see a small boat which could bring you over the river, but there is nobody to guide you, no shipper. And then it says, but you must be courageous. You must believe, because only your courage can bring you in the beautiful wonderland. Now, this is a very, very beautiful poem. It's an extremely beautiful song. And as I said, it's a metaphor, because, what is this valley? What are these beautiful flowers? And it's the creative process. It's the idea that, you can have a crisis, you can be in a terrible situation, and then you must have a vision. You must have the beautiful image of what the poets describe, those beautiful visions of the future of mankind. But then you have a crisis, this is the river which comes in between, and you almost give up. But then you make a courageous step and you start to implement your beautiful ideas, and then you get exactly where your mind determines you have to be. So it's in one sense literal, but it's much more than literal. And that's the nature of poetry, that it has a message, which goes way beyond what the words are saying. So now we should listen to this.
Gründen, die der kalten Liebe trügt, könnt ich doch den Ausgang finden. Ach, wie fühlt ich mich beglückt, ach, wie fühlt ich mich beglückt. Dort erblick ich schöne Hügel, ewig jung und ewig grün. Hätt ich Schwingen, hätt ich Flügel, nach den Hügeln zög ich hin, nach den Hügeln zög ich hin. Harmonien höher klingen, Töne süßer Himmelsruh, und die leichten Winde bringen mir der Düfte Balsam zu. Goldene Früchte, sie glühen, winken zwischen dunkeln Laub, winkend zwischen dunkeln Laub, und die Blumen, die dort blühen, werden keines Winters Raub, werden keines Winters Raub. Ach, wie schön du siehst ergehen, dort ewigen Sonnenschein, und die Luft auf jenen Höhen, oh, wie labend muss sie sein. der Grind dazwischen braust, seine Wellen sieht gehoben, dass die Seele mir ergraust. Einen Nachen sie schwanken, aber ach, der Verband fehlt. Frisch hinein, ohne Wanken, seine Sieger sind beseelt, seine Sieger sind beseelt. Frisch hinein und ohne Wanken, du musst glauben, du musst wagen, denn die Göttelein kein Pfand, nur ein Wunder kann dich tragen in das schöne Wunderland. Du musst glauben, du musst wagen, denn die Göttelein kein Pfand, nur ein Wunder kann dich tragen in das schöne Wunderland. In das schöne Wunderland.
We want to thank John Segerson, tenor and vice president of the Schiller Institute, for his performance of Schubert's Sehnsucht, as well as the phantom pianist, which I suspect was probably John himself, who I believe was accompanying himself through the magic of the virtual world that is, in some respects, not merely going to kill us all, but perhaps we can do certain things through it. What we're going to do now is go to a particular section of our presentation, and it will rely in part on some presentations that were done 25 years ago at a Schiller Institute conference on creative nonviolent direct action. What we're going to call this is we're calling it Love Conquers Hate. Now, the first excerpt is not from that conference, but is an interview which is self-explanatory, and it is with a man by the name of Johnny Lee Clary, who was previously the Imperial Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in Oklahoma. And he discusses his encounter with one of the Schiller Institute's major supporters of the 1980s, Reverend Wade Watts. The encounter was a bit earlier, and it will explain itself. We'll follow this directly afterwards with something from Reverend Watts.
In '79, I think you would have been about 22, you went to a radio debate with the Reverend Wade Watts, who was the state leader of the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People, who'd worked with Martin Luther King.
Yes.
And when you got to this debate, he held out his hand for you to shake.
Yes, he did.
Did you hesitate?
He caught me off guard. See, I'm expecting this black militant to come in with a great big afro this big and an African dashiki on with bones hanging around it and a button on that says, "I hate honkies," and "death to crackers," you know, all that stuff. And I figured he'd have on a
You
black...
seriously thought
Yeah,
that?
that's what I thought. And I thought he'd come in there carrying a boom box blaring out the theme from Shaft. I figured he'd flash a switchblade at me and go, "Black is beautiful, honky. I'm going to kill all you white devils," you know. That's what I thought I was going to see. And so when the door opened up and in came Reverend Wade Watts, and he's wearing a suit and a tie, and he's carrying a Bible, and he walks up and he puts his hand out to me. He goes, "Hello there, Mr. Clare. I'm Reverend Wade Watts. I just want to tell you I love you and Jesus loves you." And I mean, I'm shocked, you know. And then he puts his hand out, and I'm shaking his hand without thinking, because this wasn't what I was expecting. Then I realized I just broke a Klan rule, and I jerked my hand back, you know. And I started looking at my hand, which he saw that, and that was meant as an insult. The Klan rule book says the physical touch of a non-white is pollution. And I thought, I just shook hands with a black person, and he sees me looking at my hand. He goes, "Don't worry, Johnny, it don't come off." And you know, I start calling him names. I go, "You no good, sorry, bleep, 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 you mother this, you that." And he looked at me and he goes, God bless you, Johnny. He says, you can't do enough to me to make me hate you. I'm going to love you, and I'm going to pray for you whether you like it or not. And I didn't know how to deal with that. I had never had that happen to me before.
A few years later, you burnt down his church, didn't you?
Set fire to his church. See, what happened was we started off going by his house, calling him names. We got no response. Threw trash all over his lawn. Got no response. We showed up with our sheets and hoods and stood out there in his yard. Said, "Get on out here, boy. We got something for you." And he comes outside and he goes, "Boys, Halloween's 4 more months away. I got no trick-or-treat in here for you. Come back in October." And he goes back in the house.
That's a brave man.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't know how to deal with this. And so the Klan goes, "You got any more bright ideas?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "I'll tell you what we'll do." So we burned a cross across the street from his house. He came outside and asked us if we needed hot dogs and marshmallows for our barbecue, you know. So finally, I said, "I'm tired of messing with him," and we set fire to his church. And they put the fire out before the church was destroyed. And I remember I called him up, disguised my voice, and I said, "Hey, boy, you better be afraid. We're coming to get you, boy. You don't know who we are, but we know who you are." And he goes, "Hello, Johnny." And all that stuff. He goes, "A man like you takes the time to call me. I'm so honored." And all that stuff. He goes, "Let me do something to you." He goes, "Dear Lord, please forgive Johnny for being so stupid. He doesn't mean to be so ornery. He's a good boy trying to get out somewhere in there." And I hung up the phone on him. I said, "How dare him?" And so the funniest thing that happened with him, though, is I didn't know what to do. And I was at my ropes in. And one day we was watching him, and he went into a restaurant. So we got a bunch of us together, and about 30 of us went in there and surrounded him, and he had this chicken there on the table at the restaurant. And I walked up and I said, "Hey, boy, this restaurant's for white people only. We don't want you here." I said, "So I'm going to make you a promise." I said, "I promise you we're going to do the same thing to you that you do to that chicken. So you think real hard before you touch that chicken." So he looked at me and looked at the Klan, then he picked up the chicken and he kissed it. And when he kissed the chicken, the whole restaurant acted just like y'all did. They all start laughing, you know, and everything. And I looked up, and even the Klan was laughing. You got to admit, that was funny. I said, every one of you outside. I'm outside, and they're doubled over laughing. I'm going, "You guys are going to get suspended and lose your robe for 2 weeks." I said, "I'm getting tired of this." And I'm hollering at them and yelling, and they're laughing. I heard a horn honking, and Reverend Watts is driving off going, "Bye, Johnny," you know, and stuff. And that's how he chose. That's how one old black, we never bothered him again. And that's how one old black man defeated the entire Ku Klux Klan. Because he used this instead of brawn.
And he used this, too, a very brave man.
His heart, yeah.
At our conference in 1995, Reverend Watts, who had just previously videoed an appearance on the then Geraldo Rivera show, told both this story and gave a bit more, shall we say, of a less humorous, but nonetheless very ironic version of the same events and other events. We're now going to hear that.
You know, I was a state president of the NAACP in Oklahoma for 16 years, and I was a clear target for the Ku Klux Klan. And I disarmed the Ku Klux Klan with love. And I remember when we had a governor there, we had a fellow that run for governor. He knocked the Klan out there for a long time. And he was elected governor, and in his speeches, he would say this on the end of his speech: "If I'm elected to be governor, and anyone come to your house with a pillow slip over his head and a sheet around him, shoot and shoot to kill. If you go to the penitentiary, I'll pardon you." That broke them up. They didn't get started back until long about the time when they passed that school integration decision. They began to congregate again, and this is about the time I was elected president of the NAACP. Well, I got a call from a television station, from a radio station, asking me if I would debate the imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. And I told them, yeah. So we scheduled a debate, and that thing went nationwide. And we went over there, and they had a fellow by the name of John Clary, and he was the imperial wizard of Oklahoma. And he greeted me, "Hello there." Thought he said Trigger. And anyway, we went in and we got the debate started, and the fellow that was questioning both of us, well, he was asking this Ku Klux Klansman about why he didn't like why he wanted to set up an organization, why he was head of an organization, the Ku Klux Klan. Well, he said, we've got a right, he said, to have it. He said, they got an organization known as the NAACP. He said, and no whites belong to it, so we got a right to have the Ku Klux Klan. Well, I told him that back in 1909, there was a lynching in Abraham Lincoln's hometown. After the lynching, the white people found out that both of these Negroes that they lynched was innocent, and it stirred them up. And they decided that they'd form an organization to see that nothing like that never happened again. So it was 7 whites and 2 blacks that got together and formed now what is known today as the NAACP. Well, that tore his argument up there. Well, they asked him about whether he believed that they ought to go to school together. And he said no, he didn't believe they ought to go to school together because we had some good schools. He said it's separate but equal. Well, I happened to be come up under that separate but equal deal, and it was one truth in it and one great big lie. The truth of it, it was separate. But it was a long ways from being equal. So we got over that hump. And then he said all niggers, he said, come from monkeys. Ku Klux Klansmen, they was all around there, and all of them had a big laugh and a big hand clapping. And I said, John, I said, a cow will have a calf, a horse will have a coat, a dog will have puppies, a cat will have kittens, a monkey will have little monkeys, they don't have people. Then he said, well, the Bible says that everything should stay with its own kind. He made it after its own kind. I said, now, I'll have to partly agree with you there. I said, he made the trees after their kind. He made the animals after their kind. But he didn't make man after no kind. He said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness. Now, what John didn't know, that I had about 40 years experience on him in the Bible, and the Ku Klux Klansmen is not very good Bible scholars. Well, he didn't believe they ought to go to church together. Well, I told him about where Philip in the 8th chapter of Acts joined a chariot where an Ethiopian, a black man, and they was riding along, and he was expounding the gospel to him, and this black man told the white man, said, here is water here. What doth hinder me to be baptized? This white man took the black man down in the water, baptized, and took him into church right there then. Well, that told John's argument up there. Well, he didn't believe that in intermarriage, he just had a fit there. Sure didn't believe in that. Then I went to the 12th chapter of Numbers, where Moses married an Ethiopian woman, and Miriam, his sister, spoke against it, and God put leprosy on her for criticizing the marriage. Well, that tore John's argument up there. They was hollering at John, pour it on him, Johnny. Pour it on him, Johnny Lee. Pour it on him. Johnny Lee was taking a whipping. And when we came out, I had a little adopted daughter. And I guess she was about 2 months old at that time, and she was half white and half black. And it was out of a white family, and the white family didn't want the little girl. And I asked if they would give the little girl to me, and they told me, yeah, they'd give the little girl to me. And incidentally, now she finished high school this last past year, valedictorian of the class out of 261, is now going to school at Oklahoma University. Sweet little thing. But anyway, I had my wife to pull the blanket back, and I said, John, how can you hate this little baby? I said, she's done nothing to nobody. He looked at the little baby, and then he snatched his head off. And they still went off talking about him and them other Klansmen. And he looked around, and he started cursing me. And I said, John, you can't do enough to me to make me hate you. And I said, I love you like a brother. And he looked around and cursed and walked off. And then that didn't satisfy him. I had a lot right beside my house. They was going to burn a 45-foot cross. Now this was to get even with me. Well, I went into court. They sent to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and got the old Grand Dragon, Robert Shelton. They brought him in. And that trial lasted all day, but the judge finally decided in my favor. They couldn't burn the cross. So I went home, and that night, I walked to the door, and here the Klan was marching in front of my house. And I got a telephone call, and one of the deacons said, Reverend Watts, he said, your church is on fire. Said, it's burning down. They had done set the church afire. And he said, don't come out. He said, we believe it's a ploy to kill you. Now, that's one night, Rev, I didn't come out. I stayed in. Oh, yeah. I called the police. They was very helpful. They said, is he still marching by your house? I said, yeah. Well, by God, they got much right to walk out there as you have. That was a lot of help. Very encouraging. Well, after that, the next day, well, I got a call that they was going to whip me. Going to come down and give me a whipping. Well, I found a cafe that they was planning on coming to, and I went by there and made arrangements to pay for their dinner. Now, I'll be on the Geraldo show one day, I don't know when. I called them this morning, and they said that they would call me and let me know, but the tape was cut on the 14th day of December, and I told all of this on the Geraldo show. I told so much they may not want to show it. Told a whole lot of other stuff too, Rev. And anyway, after they had burnt my church down, and they was going to give me a whipping, I went by and made arrangements with the manager of the cafe to pay for the dinner. And when they came there, it was about 2 days from then. They came there, 17 of them, and he called me, and I went there. I went in the back, and when they got through eating, well, I pulled my coat off, pulled my shirt off, pulled my undershirt off, stripped down to my waist. And the manager, he walked in there with me, and he said, Reverend Watts have paid for you all's dinner, and now he's ready to take the whipping. That completely disarmed them. They actually looked for me to fight back, and I wouldn't. But before then, too, I was setting up a branch at a little old town they called Hugo. And I had got I got a lot of those old nasty telephone calls and threatening telephone calls and nasty letters and all that kind of stuff. And one letter disturbed me. I was determined to set up a branch of the NAACP. But the last call I got was from a girl that she was wanting to be the president of the NAACP. And she said, Reverend Watts, I believe if I was you, so much talk been done about what they going to do to you if you come down here. I don't believe I'd come if I was you. Now that disturbed me. So I had a white friend of mine, and I was telling him about it. Well, his son-in-law was a highway patrolman, and he called him and asked him to go with me. And he went with me in a patrol car. He was 30 seconds behind me. And they came out. They came out, but just about the time they came out, that highway, the patrol car was right on them, and then they went back. But they was going to attack that night. So anyway, I would send this imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. On Christmas, I'd send him a Christmas card. On his birthday, I'd send him a birthday card. And we were sitting on the side of the bed, me and my wife there one day. Now, this is several years later. And the phone rang. And she picked it up. And she had a strange look on her face, and she handed the phone to me and whispered, "This is that old Ku Klux Klansman." And she handed the phone to me, and I said, "Hello?" He said, "Hello, brother." Now, that was strange. It was always, "Hello, nigger." "Hello, brother." And I said, "Hello." And he said, "Reverend," he said, "the Lord has called me to preach." I said, "John, give me the privilege of letting you preach your first sermon in my church." He said, "All right, now, this is the same church they burned down." So he preached his first sermon in my church, and today he is preaching all over America and fighting racism, Rev, as hard as you are. Yeah.
And what you are seeing is the secret as to why America has never understood Martin Luther King, and therefore never really understood how to use the American Constitution in the last period after his assassination. Christianity is either a practice or it is nothing, and the politics are incidental. Martin Luther King was not a political figure. He was a minister. Others that associated with him, attempted to, together with him, use the courage that they took them to live day by day and create a method by which Americans could understand how you could address any problem, not by being passive, but by being extraordinarily aggressive. And I should just say that Reverend Watts had been a professional gambler who carried, back then, a six-shooter, actually, and worked a sort of game with others, and became a minister because he had to escape once from a crap game in which he was cheating. And it was that caused him to find his way to God, because he found that it must be a better way than that. What we're going to do now is show you an excerpt in which the issue of King's assassination, ostensibly by James Earl Ray, is taken up by the Reverend James Bevel. This was in 1995, and he's introduced by me at that time.
The man I'm about to introduce was there that day. And while others stood on the balcony pointing in the direction from which the shot did not come, he was downstairs trying to make sure the police didn't arrest them all, which was what the intention of the police was. A year later, he offered a proposal that what ought to occur is that the purported assassin, James Earl Ray, ought to be given a trial, because Ray had mistakenly pled guilty because he thought he would get the electric chair otherwise. That proposal was not adopted at that time. And the speaker, who was being introduced now, argues that that is one of the main bases for the eruption of violence in our country today. And so I'd like to say, in transition, that if it is possible that there can be a picking up of the shards of the dream, or the pieces of the dream, and that can in fact be acted on again, that has to be done by this group of people. And we're here tonight to tell you, or to try to give you an inspiration as to how you might do that. So I'd like at this time to introduce the Reverend James Bevel.
Now, what I want to do is take some time to go over, I'm happy to present this material because it'll give me the opportunity to show you primarily the thinking process behind that, because Lynn made a point about how some people get their bodies involved, but they don't get their minds involved. And that's important, because at this point, we need minds. We've got plenty of bodies on every corner. Jails full of people. And every time a ball game is played, the stadiums are all packed. So human bodies is not the problem. Human minds working is the problem. So what we have to do is build a thinking army, an army of thinkers, people who can actually think, and we're going to get into that because thinking is very simple, and most people it just never occurred to most people that they should learn to do it, because they get jobs, right? And once you get a job, you don't have to think. You just sell labor and take money and buy things. So as long as you have a job, you don't have to think. And of course, then we promote non-thinking because people assume that it's easier to manage non-thinking people. And you don't have to deal with them because thinking people, you have to always deal with them as government, because once a person is a thinker, the person is a government. That's what a government is. A government is a thinking person. And so when we say government, we mean a thinking person or a group of thinking people. Lynn said this morning that nations fail because they move on erroneous ideas. Y'all remember that? And then he went into Germany and talked about how the Germans who came up with these erroneous ideas actually failed because they acted on these ideas, and these ideas were not true. Therefore, they were operating on that which was not real. And if you operate on that which is not real, just the very operation on that which is not real causes failure. It has nothing to do with an enemy. It has to do with just erroneous calculations. But let me take that a step further, and so you can get involved in what he was talking about. Not only do nations fail because of erroneous ideas acted on, all human beings fail as individuals and as groups of individuals for the same reason, acting on erroneous ideas. Now, this is how I got involved in the movement. And I want you to hear this equation. Mahatma Gandhi says, if you live in a social system, and that social system is not just, and your daily life have you working to survive in that unjust system, you are the cause of the problem. See? And that's what most people don't understand, because see, let's say we're in America, and James Earl Ray didn't get a fair trial. Well, most of you would assume that that's someone else's responsibility to make sure Ray get a fair trial, right? Then you have to ask yourself the question, well, how is that any more someone else's responsibility than it is yours? See, that's an erroneous concept, that maybe the Attorney General should get him a fair trial. Maybe that's the problem with the governor. Maybe the prosecutor of the city should do that. And maybe the FBI. And maybe the Congress. No. That responsibility falls squarely on the shoulders of the American citizen, to see to it that people get a fair trial. That's the American citizen responsibility. That's the work of American citizens. Okay, so when American citizens don't do work, that is their work to do. When that work goes undone, then everybody is ill affected because that work is not done. Now, what has happened as a result of Ray not getting a fair trial, and the American people are not making an issue of Ray getting a fair trial, what has happened essentially is that plea bargaining, capital punishment, and case law has now replaced due process of law in the American judicial system. Well, that's because the American citizens was doing whatever they claimed they were doing, that they didn't stop to make sure that justice was put in place or upheld. Now, the way the law works in God's universe is this. If you do not stand up for justice, justice will not stand up for you.
The army of thinkers is what is needed, not an army on the mall or the secret army of insurrection. The size of the army is irrelevant. It's the size of their ideas that matters. We're going to go now to the next section of our presentations of today. And in general, they're referring to this as, you have not converted a man merely because you have silenced him. The deeper implications of the digital oligarchy's suppression of thought. We're going to start by showing something we've already shown before, but not today, which is the brief remarks made by Mexican President López Obrador in response to the suppression of Donald Trump, the President of the United States, by Twitter and other social media platforms.
En el afán de no solamente estar en redes sociales luchando, sino que como las redes sociales tienen dueños y ya vimos que generan apagones y que también hay infodemia y que también se controla y se censura a los comunicadores alternativos.
Esto que tú bien señalas como un apagón, ¿sí? Esto que hicieron hace unos días en Estados Unidos es una mala señal. Es un mal presagio de que deciden empresas particulares silenciar, censurar. Eso va en contra de la libertad. Entonces, no se vaya a estar creando un gobierno mundial con el poder de el control de las redes sociales, un poder mediático mundial, además un tribunal de censura como la Santa Inquisición, pero para el manejo de la opinión pública. Es gravísimo. Claro que hay que estar pensando en opciones, en alternativas, porque sí, yo creo que fue un antes y un después en el caso de las redes sociales, lo que sucedió hace unos días. Luego leí la carta del dueño de Face y lo sentí con mucha prepotencia, con mucha arrogancia, o sea, hablando de sus normas y que la libertad y el derecho a la información y el papel de las autoridades legal y legítimamente constituidas, no dejar de crear medios alternativos y que se permita siempre el que se informe al pueblo, que se garantice el derecho a la información. Entonces, así contesto tu pregunta.
Sí.
We're now going to hear from Juan Francisco Soto, who's a constitutional attorney from Argentina and was a member of our Schiller Institute International Investigative Commission for Truth in Elections. He'll be speaking in Spanish, and we'll hear the translation. Welcome, sir.
¿Qué tal? Muy buenas tardes.
Hi, good afternoon. It's a real pleasure and honor for me to participate in this important today to recall such a great humanist as Martin Luther King was. As a member of the Investigative Commission of the unfortunately memorable elections here in the United States, I clearly want to say that the testimony that was presented about Smartmatic and the testimony that was presented to us by the witnesses that saw the recounting of the votes from the mail-in ballots, there was more than sufficient evidence of a massive fraud that was carried out, cyber fraud and a manual fraud as well. We greatly lament that, as I was just listening very carefully in the earlier presentations, when there was a discussion of the idea of two processes of law, or the true process, the idea of natural law, which is reflected in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, the idea that every state should not deny the right to vote of any individual, of every citizen of the United States. And somehow, I want to make it very clear that there was fraud, especially in the so-called swing states where what was irregular and there was illegalities committed, where vote counting systems were hired in the last years. But I don't want to talk about this only. I would like to also take this opportunity to where we were discussing the life and work of Martin Luther King, to discuss also what the structural poverty which all of Latin America is suffering today. I'm an Argentine, and unfortunately, we also see that the crisis is also getting worse and worse inside the United States itself, and even in Canada as well. So therefore, what I want to refer to is what the concrete meaning is of moving forward on the idea of the new Silk Road, which began in 2013. This is something which was not foreseen, which was not expected. It wasn't generally accepted, but only the very important activists associated with the deceased Linda LaRouche and with Helga Zepp-LaRouche have been arguing for the idea of a world land bridge. Today, we see a tremendous opportunity, a concrete, very real opportunity in the advance of the world land bridge and the new Silk Road since 2013, and it's the advance of those land bridge elements which can be seen in China's proposals in what they've referred to as the Eurasian land bridge, and how this has to be an example, and this has to be adopted by the activists from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, because we have to think on a grand scale, because that's the only way to get out of this kind of crisis, thinking on a grand scale, because that's the financial crisis that's taking this direction, as has been documented in the Davos meetings and so on. This is what Helga was talking about in her presentation. We have to have basic infrastructure. This is needed for the physical economy, and that's the way we're going to be able to bring jobs and true opportunities to a large part of the population. We have a continent which has development only on its coasts, on its ports, but the cities, the interior of the continent in both North America and South America, and also Central America, they don't have the necessary kinds of opportunities they should have. If there's no physical economy, there can't be social justice. As Martin Luther King said, we will not have an equality of opportunities for the great number of young people who cannot find employment today. We only hear about caravans of migrants in conditions under extreme structural poverty, and of the criminality and difficulties that this brings with it. These are situations that we don't want for our youth, that are in Colombia, Central America, in Argentina, in Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, and unfortunately in Mexico, the United States as well. And if the financial crisis gets worse, we're going to have this in Canada and elsewhere as well. So to think big, the way Linda LaRouche said when he proposed NAWAPA, for example, as a continuation of the ideas of John F. Kennedy, but now concretely, this type of initiative, this type of approach of NAWAPA, extending this with the idea of the new Silk Road, this brings us to the kinds of solution, at least the solution-based conceptual ideas that we have to demand of each and every one of the republics of the Americas. And that is a collaboration among sovereign nation states. We have to move forward with the new Silk Road of the Americas. We have to break the glass ceilings that we have that are obstacles to our development. One of those obstacles, one of the clearest ones that we have in the Americas, is the famous Darien Gap. This is something that is not on anyone's political agenda, and this is clear of any of the presidents of the Americas, and we should urgently get those presidents together, of Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, Mexico, Argentina, Chile, and of North America, of the United States, to establish a policy proposal to take up the proposals that go back to the 19th century, the idea of establishing a Pan-American railroad, but with the appropriate technologies of the 21st century. the rail system of the Americas is totally backwards compared to the Asian networks. And this is the case in the United States as well, which is, of course, the greatest power of the West, economically and technologically. And therefore, we, in the face of the terrible situation of structural poverty, the lack of opportunities, we should have enough common sense to push the natural development of these populations, which is something that has been written about since Abraham Lincoln, since Ulysses Grant, with the ideas of William McKinley, who was he was assassinated not by accident on the eve of the Pan American Congress, and to take up again the agenda of the corridors of development, of industrial development, all the way from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego. If we don't have a root of prosperity, of optimism for people, people will be left with speeches of pessimism connected with unscientific extremism. For example, the Green Horizons Summit of 2020, where what they try to establish is a extremely rigorous criterion so that companies can only get credit if they have proposals which have nothing to do with the science based on the carbon emissions of these industries. This is really a form of economic fascism. So therefore, we have to take up again the idea of the World Land Bridge and the chapter of the Americas of the New Silk Road. And the Darien Gap is something which unites us, which must unite all of the presidents, all of the republics of the continent to establish a joint agenda and take up again what would be the Pan American Congress of Railroads. The networks and the way and the route of those development corridors of that railroad has to take into consideration the sovereign requirements of each of the countries in question, of course, in South America and in North America and Central America as well. And we all have to agree on one common purpose, which is that the Darien Gap has to urgently have a development corridor which runs through it so that the current caravans of miserable migrant people become instead a development corridor, which will provide dignity with work for the people of those areas. And that is what I would like to be the real message, which we would make sure that it reaches each of the leaderships and the governments of the countries of all of the Americas to establish a new chapter of the Americas for the new Silk Road.
Thank you very much, Mr. Soto. And now what we're going to do is to transition and bring up actually several other speakers, and we're calling this Truth and Reconciliation for Citizens Committee on Truth in Elections. So joining us now, myself and Helga, will be Steve Freeman, author, founder, and director of the Election Integrity Forum. He authored a book called Was the 2004 Presidential Election Stolen? Exit Polls, Election Fraud, and the Official Count. Also, we have Kathy Latham, chairman of the Coffee County Republican Party of Georgia, Leah Hoops, president of Pennsylvania Voter Alliance, and Diane Sayer, is an independent candidate for United States Senate, running against Chuck Schumer. So what we're going to do is start with you, Steve. You and I had a brief conversation in which we talked about a mutual friend of ours, Paul Robeson Jr., who had a lot of interest in this matter. But rather than editorialize, I'll let you go ahead and say what you had to say. I think you're muted. You're muted. Yes, you're muted.
Sorry.
All right.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Okay, so talking about truth in elections. Everybody understands one reason why elections are important. If we didn't have them, we might not wind up with representatives we trust and respect. We might hypothetically wind up with unscrupulous leaders. So, but election integrity is still more crucial for a sense of honesty, for truth, and to maintain the peace. The purpose of elections, which seemingly the political establishment is ignoring or doesn't understand, is that it's less to anoint the winners than to assuage the losers. Fair and open elections provide an opportunity for all to have their say, even run for office, and have a fair chance to prevail. Under these conditions, they can accept that an electorate chose otherwise and that they'll have a chance next election, but they must now abide by the outcome. It's not enough to say that the votes are counted honestly. It's not even enough to count them honestly. Democracy requires that citizens can see for themselves that votes are counted honestly. So we have a system, though, that invites mistrust. This began with vote counting machines in the 1960s, and elections have never been quite trustworthy since. This was multiplied with the introduction of electronic voting in 2002. I did a presentation for the American Statistical Association that the Washington Post reported on, in which I compared the security you have when you put money in a Las Vegas slot machine, that you have a fair chance of prevailing and winning, versus the complete uncertainty that your vote is going to be counted as cast in a voting machine. And it's basically, we have this system where you push a button, something happens in a black box, proprietary software, which for the most part has never been opened up for viewing, and then a vote gets counted. You have no way of knowing whether it's right or not. And so often we're told that there's never been an example of these machines being proven to have fraud, that it's all hypothetical. But in fact, we've proven many, many elections to have been fraudulent. And it's very difficult to do. It takes a lot of time to do it. Nobody's forthcoming with information. But Florida 2000, Georgia, all the new voting machine elections, beginning with 2002, there was just tremendous fraud. I studied most intently the 2004 election. And there, if you recall, there were two aspects about it that are particularly noteworthy. One, it was the first presidential election with a great deal of electronic voting. But in addition to that, it was decided in one state, Ohio. If Ohio would have gone differently, then the country would have gone differently. And we were able to document that quite well. It took a long time. We had exit polls that were meaningful then, because there was election day voting for the most part. You can go and compare the results of how people said they voted upon leaving the polling place. I mean, exit polls are very different than regular polls. You have a chance to, first of all, you know whether or not the people actually vote, because you're asking them upon leaving the polling place. There's no chance they're going to change their mind because they've already voted. And you have the entire selection of people right there. It's not like you're calling up somebody and some people answer, some don't, some want to talk to you, some don't. Everybody walks out the door and you know they voted, everyone who's there, so you can get a totally representative sample. And so we had these exit polls, and in many states, the numbers were just impossibly different. We'll get to a slide in a second where I show the statistical probabilities. That's this one. And, people don't understand statistics well. Congress people, I testified before Congress about this, and I'd say none of them really understand statistics. But, I mean, this graphic gives you the idea. If you get a certain percentage of people saying they voted one way and there's a number, there's a probability that's going to be within a few percentage points. And the possibility of what happened in 2004 is just, like lightning striking the same spot 5 times in a row over 5 weeks. It's just impossible. And that's what this graphic shows. We have, in addition to that, we had other kinds of evidence. We were able to go in and verify. One very intrepid, resolute researcher went and actually counted the ballots. There were physical ballots in most of the places there, and he counted, and supposedly Bush won by 140,000 votes, but he'd already counted, by the time he stopped, over 140,000 votes that had been miscounted. So that's where we were with proving elections. What's changed since 2004? Well, you know, we've been arguing about this and talking, you know, falling on deaf ears for a lot of reasons. But basically, things have gotten considerably worse. There's extensive early voting and mail-in voting, and these not only give additional opportunities for corruption, they can make adjustments, fix things additionally, but it also eliminates election day surveys. You know, the one check we had on the system, the exit polls. Mail-in voting is physically the easiest fix of all. There's consolidated precincts, so it's more difficult to document fraud, and it's also much less convenient to vote, and it also gives one more transportation. So instead of counting them at the polling place, the votes, there's another transport where anything can happen. There's also been more voting machine industry consolidation. This all kind of reaches, with the decline in trust for elections, there's a general decline. It's not coincidental. Really dramatic decline in confidence in almost all institutions. Maybe not the military, but other institutions, it's just so low. Only 1 in 10 Americans over the past decade says they have much confidence in Congress. I mean, that is just irreconcilable with the idea of democracy, representative government. In 2020, this reaches a crescendo, or plummets to a further decline. We have this hastily organized, widely expanded early voting and mail-in voting. And there are literally, this is not a rhetorical overstatement, but literally thousands of instances suggesting fraud. There's yet another worthless machine. There's not a good word for this. I was looking for a word for worse than worthless, because we're paying billions of dollars to these voting machine companies to basically permit them to obscure the system and steal votes. I mean, it's not an insignificant amount of money. The Secretary of State of Georgia wrote a $180 million check to Dominion Voting Company shortly before, you know, they were supposed to count the votes. So there's a lot of money going to them to allow them to steal the systems, steal the things. And then the obscurity afterwards was perhaps worse than ever. I mean, it was really bad. There's a graphic I have of in Detroit, where people wanted, these are credentialed observers. These are people who were legally permitted, many of them the Republican committeemen from the district, supposed to be able to observe the count. And not only did they not let them in the room, but they put up taped up paper so nobody could even see inside what was happening. So this is what we're supposed to trust, these results? Okay, so this is what happens in these systems. And, you know, given how long this has been going on, one would think, oh, this is just an insoluble problem. It's just too complicated. And this is what we always hear, that it's a very complicated problem. But the fact of it is, it's really simple. All we would have to do to instill trust in elections, to have truth in elections, is to do what every democracy around the world actually does. And that is have transparency. It would be remarkably simple. First thing is to have in-person voting at the polls on election day. People like well, it's always argued that, well, why can't people just vote from home or just mail in the votes? But that introduces all kinds of opportunities for fraud. And every democracy around the world, for the most part, has pretty strict regulations regarding in-person voting at the polls. Some absolute. Those are the only votes. It also allows for other kinds of verification. The second critical thing are hand-counted paper ballots filled in ink. You put it in ink, there's no chance to change it. Really, really simple. And it's what every country in the world, every real democracy in the world does. And wherever we've debated, in Ireland, they bought all these machines. They listened to testimony. I gave an affidavit for that. And they actually threw away the new machines. They realized these things were worse than worthless. And other countries do the same thing. In Canada, they just strengthened the regulations. They made it much more difficult for anyone to ever introduce electronic voting. Third thing would be to permit poll watchers representing the candidates to watch it. A basic condition. Most countries around the world permit international observers. The US doesn't let them, and as you saw in Detroit, and in my hometown of Philadelphia, this doesn't happen. They're frequently just prevented from viewing. Fourth is a unbroken chain of custody. The amount of times ballots in the US get transferred is just absurd. They get transferred back and forth and here and there. And every one of those transfers is one more opportunity to stuff the ballot boxes, lose ballots, change ballots. This is the way it's done where the election is taken seriously. You put the ballot in a transparent ballot box, and at the end of the day, people get together, and we'll go to number 5 here. You skip this one. The fifth point is that at the end of the day, there's hand counts of all ballots at the polling place, not a central facility that there's a transfer to and that there's tabulating machines, but people count the ballots that have been in the transparent ballot boxes, and you have a number right then and there. The final 2 points are to tallies posted on the doors. And I remember the first time I voted, this was a standard practice. It may still be in many places that they count the votes and they put up the numbers right on the door. And then you also send it in so that they can be tabulated, the accumulation of these things. And that the election results comprise the sum of the tallies from the individual polling place. And it's very simple. You don't have Fox News or AP calling the election, telling us who won based on who knows what, but it's quite simple, these tallies. So, I mean, as you can see, anytime they say this is too complicated or come up with any of a myriad of excuses for obfuscation and making these results non-transparent, it's all, I mean, that is itself fraudulent. So, again, very technologically quite simple, but politically, of course, this is a tremendous challenge. And every election official in the U.S., either directly or indirectly, owes their career to this system. And we see what happens when you challenge it. Whatever you think of Donald Trump, the world is not coming down on him right now because of those things. They're coming down on him because he wants to pull troops out of war zones or non-war zones, whatever they're doing. I don't even know what they're doing in Afghanistan still. And they're especially coming down on him because he has challenged the system. We've had many candidates who have had elections stolen from them. John Kerry, Al Gore, Bernie Sanders twice, the nomination. But they don't stand up to these people. And perhaps career-wise, that's the wise move. But that's why they're coming down so hard on Donald Trump now. So what we're asking is that people, we have a petition, my group, Election Integrity. I hope people will come to the site, sign the petition, and perhaps join us. So the politics of change are difficult, but that's what we'll try to do. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. We're going to go to Kathy Latham, chairman of the Coffee County Republican Party, and I think you have a video you're going to show. Can you just help us set that up?
Yes. I'm from Coffee County here in Georgia, and we are the one county that did not certify the recount when it came time for doing the recount for the president. During the presidential primary, our supervisor realized that she just accidentally clicked on the program and realized that she could change votes on the system, the Dominion system. And they called me in with after they had shown this to the Board of Elections, and I said, "You need to make a video. This is amazing. You've got to show this. Get this to the Secretary of State." They did. Nothing was done. So the decision was made after the election to put this and make it go on YouTube and make it go viral. And it shows our county supervisor running a mock election with the election board, and shows how easy it is to manipulate the vote during adjudication of the ballots.
I want to adjudicate it right here. This is one that I did right before y'all got here. So we're going to go and say we're going to complete this one just like it is. But if you look, here is a vote that is double voted. It's overvoted. I don't know if when I hit complete, is it going to accept a vote for both candidates? Or is it, since there's a red box around it, is it going to reject it altogether? I don't know. So I'm going to say it's complete. I could also say hide the box. The box went away. There's a check mark. Did it accept the check mark? I don't know. But I'm going to say nothing needs to be changed. Okay?
Does it tell you what it does after you
No, sir.
hit complete?
No, sir. I'm going to say, I want to take it. No, wait just a minute. I want to go and I think I want to vote for Jason Shaw. They didn't vote that ballot a while ago. There wasn't nothing there. I think we need to vote for him. And I'm going to complete it. Confirm ballot save, move to next ballot. Okay. So it pulls up the next ballot that needs to be adjudicated.
So you made a vote for someone where someone did not vote.
I did, didn't I?
And you're the election supervisor?
I'm the election supervisor. I am the person that sits and does the adjudication. Yes, sir?
Go back to the Trump and Biden race and decide, since both are marked, you just count one of them and not count the other one? Can you decide?
Let's see. Yep, sure can. I think I want to vote for Biden. Let's let Biden win this one.
So what you put supersedes whatever.
Uh-huh.
So you...
But I decided this Al, he don't deserve no votes. Let's not let nobody vote for that. And complete. Okay. Well, here's another one.
That's what we got from our discussion the other day.
I don't think any votes need to vote on this ballot.
Oh, wow.
I think this really needs to be just a blank ballot.
Okay, Kathy, back to you.
Yes. So, we showed this, we got this to the Secretary of State, and along with other problems we had during the primary, and nothing was ever done. They would never respond to the county, never would tell us, that they got this or whatever. We had problems with the scanner during the primaries. We tried several times before the presidential election to get new scanners. They ignored us. I even personally contacted the Secretary of State, talked to Gabe Sterling. No response. They just would tell me, "Oh, we're on it. You're on our list." They never helped us. We had all kinds of problems during the elections with equipment, etc. We had problems in the hand count. We had problems in the recount. And finally, by the time we did the recount, the Board of Elections decided not to certify because we could never duplicate within a margin of error exactly what we got on election night. So they decided not to certify. I'm also the under 80,000 chair for the Georgia GOP. In other words, I'm over 129 counties, the small counties in Georgia, the rural counties. So when I found out we were having these problems, I contacted other counties and found out that these counties had the same exact problems we did, not being able to duplicate what happened on election night, and the Secretary of State's office forced them to certify. Forced these counties to certify election results that they could not get to repeat from election night. One county I know was 2.3% off. Another county was told to submit their election results, their recount results, and miraculously, the Secretary of State's office found an extra batch they didn't count. Another county near us was 106 votes off, and they could never reconcile that. They were forced to certify. So we have a Secretary of State's office who is certifying fraudulent numbers. The hand count, if anybody looked at the hand count, the Secretary of State's office said that the numbers came out in the wash, but yet when you look at it, the numbers were way off. The numbers were way off. They found over 5,000 votes, but each candidate either lost or gained 500 votes, approximately. You know, just funky things like that. And you're talking to people in saying that the numbers match, but when you look at the data, the numbers don't match. We also had so many problems with the absentee ballots. In fact, in the runoff election, we challenged thousands upon thousands of fraudulent absentee ballots. People who had change of addresses with the Postal Service in every county, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ballots. In some of those cases, we lost in the court. In some cases, we won. Just in my county, we challenged 600 ballots and won all 600 challenges. People who were just fraudulently voting had moved out of state, out of the county, and were still trying to vote to affect this election. When votes can be manipulated by the adjudication process, when votes can be changed, when votes can be added to a system through fraudulent absentee ballots, and then even during the runoff election, when we were running ballots through there, they constantly were kicking out because the machine wouldn't read the QR code. A machine that is forcing you to adjudicate ballots where they can be manipulated is not a system that can be trusted. And then when you look at the numbers of people who didn't vote in the runoff because they don't trust the vote. We used the same machines that we used in November that nobody had any safe concerns about. They felt like, I don't know how many people I said, but we're voting on the same machine. Can it be manipulated? Can the votes be changed? Is some server in another country, are they changing our ballots? I mean, we know that the server was located in Germany. Why is the server for American elections located in a foreign country? How can that be secure? How is that being transparent? You know, we worry about how our vote is. And now that we have this going on now for several elections, what is this doing historically to the vote in the United States? Probably the main concern I have is that I'm a teacher and I teach seniors. And I've been very adamant in getting my seniors to get involved in elections, getting them involved, to be poll workers, to go out and wave signs, to go out and post signs, to do things during election. And now our kids are being targeted and bullied for being involved in elections. No matter what side they were on, they were bullied and targeted by both sides. So think about this generation of kids. I mean, I'm worried about them. They've gone through COVID. They've gone through lockdowns. They're being isolated now in our voting system. We now have these kids being targeted and bullied. What are we doing to a whole generation of kids and making them be active citizens in our republic, in our democracy? It's getting to the point now that anybody can be targeted for anything that they believe, anything, any way that they vote. We're all being called names. There's no separation in what we're doing. We're just targeting. And I guess one of the big questions is this going to be one of these things that's going to become generational? Are we going to see a generation of voters who are not going to get involved because they do not trust the system? And, you know, the gentleman that was speaking before us, he's talking about transparency. They've seen it on TV. They saw those posters being held up in windows. They've seen the pictures of the vote poll workers being kept 20 feet away from watching signature verification. Cobb County verifies 15,000 votes and doesn't allow anybody in there to look at what districts or what polling precincts they used. How were they verifying these signatures? And they said they only found 2. That's statistically impossible. These people that were verifying the signatures, they didn't know what they were doing. There is not one poll worker, one election supervisor who has had GBI training, according to Gabe Sterling and Brad Raffensperger. They all said they've had GBI training, but not one supervisor can show you a booklet, can show you PowerPoints or anything where they received any training. In fact, they'll tell you they've received no training in signature verification. Constantly, those election supervisors are told to leave the signature verification up to their election boards. And the election boards are just appointed officials by your county commissioners, at least here in my county, that's how they're appointed. You know, Georgia has this ballot marking device that creates this QR code. You cannot, when you're counting votes, can you see voter intent, because it's just a print off. And the print is very tiny. It has a big QR code in the middle. How do people know what they voted? How do people know what's in that QR code? How do they know that what they printed is what is there? It's almost like you're doing autocorrect when you're on your phone. How do you know what you've typed in is what gets printed? Because usually they're rushing you through the voting process. Now scan your ballot, scan your ballot. Nobody's telling you to check your ballot. And hardly any Georgia voters got any education in how to use this machine. They were scared to death when they said, the machine ate my ballot. They thought when their vote was being scanned that the machine ate their ballot. I would have to tell people, no, the machine did not eat your ballot. It was a scanner, and it dropped into this trash can looking device, and that stores your ballot. Nobody knew how to vote on these machines, and there was no education about it. There was no training. Because of the pandemic in June, many people did not use those machines in the primary. Most people used that massive absentee ballot push that was done by the Secretary of State. Georgia is messed up. It's messed up in the election process, and it needs to be fixed. It needs to be fixed for the next election. We have a huge election coming up in 2022 where all constitutional officers in the state of Georgia will be reelected. Our governor, Secretary of State, everybody. The seat that was just lost by Loeffler will be up for reelection. That will be an important election to see if we can take that Senate seat and flip it back. But the system has to be fixed. It's a broken system, and it is a $110 million rotten egg that needs to be fixed. And I don't think a lot of voters will come out and use this system again because they don't trust the system.
All right. Thank you very much, Kathy. Some people have heard before Leah Hoops, who's the president of the Pennsylvania Voter Alliance. We're very happy to have you here today, Leah, so take it away. You're muted, and we definitely want to make sure your voice is heard. So,
my apologies. Hi, everybody. Thank you again for having me. It's always such a pleasure to be a part of the Schiller Institute and just have a very diverse bunch of great minds. And it's great to have this presentation of civil discourse, to be quite honest. Forgive me if I get a little emotional today. It has been a whirlwind, especially the past 2 weeks or so. I've been harassed for the past 6 months, and I'm dealing with local authorities. And as of today, the other day actually, I was left a card by the FBI to get into contact with them. So it's a little concerning. I'm starting to feel a little bit like Lyndon LaRouche and our president. And also even we can speak about Benjamin Franklin and Martin Luther King, which is why we're really here today. So I was going to start off with a few quotes that I just wanted to bring to light. One from Benjamin Franklin, and that is, freedom is not a gift bestowed upon us by other men, but a right that belongs to us by the laws of God and nature. And the second is by Martin Luther King Jr., and that is, freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. There was a short, a very small excerpt from I guess it was an interview that he had or maybe a conversation that he was having, but Martin Luther King had said, if I had lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they hadn't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of the press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for right. And so, just as I say, we aren't going to let dogs or water hoses turn us around. We aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. We're going on. His daughter last year, Bernice, had made a tweet in regards to Mark Zuckerberg's free expression speech. And she had stated, I heard Mark Zuckerberg's free expression speech in which he referenced my father. I'd like to help Facebook better understand the challenges of Martin Luther King that he faced from disinformation campaigns launched by politicians. These campaigns created an atmosphere for his assassination. I thought that was a very profound statement, and really it brings us to exactly where we are today. And I'm personally experiencing this disinformation that is allowed on social media platforms. And, you know, if you can shut down the president of the United States, Lord knows what's going to happen to someone like myself. And it's very concerning. I think we've moved so very far away from the Constitution, and that our God-given rights are being suppressed. As that's basically why I got involved in the first place. And right now we are embarking on very hostile waters, and trying to get accurate information out is nearly impossible. I mean, we're seeing the shutdown of social media, and conservatives especially who are being, we're being silenced. And just right now it's the inability to hold civil discourse. And I think social media has become a cesspool of just hatred and just really poor display of civil discourse, and a place for people just to express a lot of anger. And I think it's a threat. I think it's a threat to democracy, that they preach that it's a free expression, and but only to their standards. That's not free speech at all. And like I said, the feeling that I'm getting right now, I can't even imagine what Lyndon LaRouche had gone through, or Martin Luther King, or Benjamin Franklin. I mean, these men were embracing times in which their civil liberties were being infringed upon, and they had the fortitude to carry on anyway. And much like our president right now. And over the past 6 months, I've received some hate and some disinformation, which I have mentioned. Right now, I have someone harassing me online, amongst other people. My name has been given to the FBI for being a radical and a white supremacist. And just the other day, the local authorities were at my home because someone said that I have pictures of myself on Facebook with my AK-47. Yeah, I've been dealing with a lot of legal issues. And it's all disinformation, and all they're trying to do is just suppress my voice at this point. And to me, I have nothing to hide. I am a law-abiding citizen. I'm just trying to get the truth out there, and these are just the times that we're in, and it's very concerning. It's very concerning for my my safety, my family's safety. But this is what we are up against, and I don't plan on going anywhere, and I have to continue on and move forward anyway, regardless of what may come, or what they might try to do. Myself, Greg Stenstrom, which has been on the Schiller Institute before, he was also a witness in Gettysburg and a candidate in our local elections. We were actually part of a petition in our county against the Board of Elections, and we were denied an evidentiary hearing. Not only were we denied an evidentiary hearing, but the opinion that came from the judge was, he excoriated us. He used the words, we had unclean hands, and that our actions were contemptible. He had threatened with sanctions to our lawyer and also to us. So not only did he throw out the case, but he completely just destroyed us in an opinion. And I'm just questioning, why were we denied? I feel like yet again another another freedom or another right to petition, and then we're not even given the opportunity to present the evidence that we have. So again, it's just another right that is being suppressed, and we're being bullied to just keep our mouths shut. What I do want to mention is, with darkness comes light. And with everything that's happening to me and other people, obviously, across the country, who are trying to get the truth out, what I have noticed is that it has created unity, and it has created compassion, and it has also created an informed populace, which is the ultimate goal. It's why I got involved in the first place, and it's something that I really want to continue to move forward with, is the civil discourse, uniting us as Americans, and bringing it back to the Constitution and accountability and following the law. And I'm hopeful that we are going to be able to do this as citizens. I have started on my own. I've started grassroots groups. I'm teaching people how to become poll workers, how to become poll watchers. I'm helping to inform people about federal laws as well as state laws when it comes to our elections. We're trying to get local prosecutors involved with the Thomas More Society, and just really focusing heavily on integrity and how important election integrity is, because without our right to vote, and our right to have transparency in our election, we're really at a disadvantage, and it's really discouraging people to vote. So I plan on moving forward, and collecting more people, and the grassroots efforts is where it's really going to be. We have to take a stand, and we have to be involved, and we have to be accountable, and we have to make sure that we fight for our freedoms, and make sure that we're holding the legislators accountable as well, and making sure that they're doing their jobs. So that's just kind of where I am right now. I have a lot on my plate, but I'm ready, and I'm going to continue to do what the right thing and try to fight for our rights.
Well, thank you. And what we're going to do is to have someone respond to you who might not have been expected to do so. And this is Amelia Boynton Robinson. She is deceased, but she was the vice president of Schiller Institute for 25 years. And she began first organizing to have people vote in the year 1920 when she was 9 years old and when she would travel around with her mother, horse and buggy. And she registered people to vote or organized to do so for 95 years. She literally went out every year, especially at the end of her life, to do that. So we have a brief response to you from her.
And I believe that Martin is looking down now, Martin Luther King, whom to me was just Martin, because I'm old enough for his mother. And when he came to Selma, people rejected him.
That's right. That's right.
I believe we could make a type of plan that we are going in different places, and we are going to get people to realize that a voteless people is a hopeless people.
I'd like to ask that Diane Sayre, who is a independent candidate for the United States Senate, was running against Chuck Schumer in New York, might respond also to what she's heard and what Leah said, but also the arc of what we've been through all day. Diane?
Sure, thank you. First of all, we've heard a lot, but I spoke with another friend who's running for governor in New York in 2022 and told him that the two of us, we're going to have to get on the case, and since it's decided in the states, ensure that the state of New York has a system for the elections by 2021, this year, that actually is something that the American citizens, the voters in New York, have faith in. And I appreciated the first presentation, that it's not enough for someone to tell you that it's a transparent system, but people have to know that they can verify for themselves that it is a fraud-free system. These questions of confidence are very important. And also, I think the American people, and I think most people on the planet, would be willing to abide by an election whose results they did not like if they believed that this was reflective of what the majority of the population wanted. And if you believed that the majority was mistaken or wrong, then you would have an organizing job to do to get people to change the way they thought or to correct their errors. We have a situation now where the gods of Olympus, the big tech companies, the gigantic, too big to jail financial institutions, believe that they are going to make up their own arbitrary laws, and it's really not going to work. That doesn't guarantee that we are going to be successful in establishing the kind of world that dignified human beings want to live in. That's another job that we absolutely have to do. But what is guaranteed is that people who violate the principles of natural law absolutely will fail. And what Martin Luther King understood, as well as Lyndon LaRouche, and I think some of the people here and around the country who are displaying unusual courage, understand, is that because there is a principle of justice in the universe, because there is universal law, if you work to bring yourself through creative reason into accord with that, you have a kind of power that the people who are violating it do not have. I think in part that is what was reflected in what Helga said about Schiller. Before you go on to the stage, before you open your mouth to sing, as Marian Anderson clearly is a sublime person, you want to be in accord with these principles. And one thing that happened this week, which I think demonstrates this, is the fact that this CNN historian, Douglas Brinkley, who was frankly gloating over the totally absurd second impeachment of President Donald Trump, found himself saying the name Lyndon LaRouche, that Trump would go down as in infamy as these other people. And of course, the point being that LaRouche is supposedly forgotten. Well, of course, if LaRouche is forgotten, why is this guy talking about him now? He's obviously very much on his mind. I would say even haunting him. And we used to have a bumper sticker that said, "Don't say nasty things about LaRouche if you've got something to hide," because it is a principle like the famous Schiller drama, The Cranes of Ibycus, that your crimes, in this case, the highway bandits who had murdered a beloved poet off in the woods where no one was there to see, but a flock of cranes was flying overhead. And the poet cried out to the cranes, "Avenge me." And then you get to the Colosseum and everyone is waiting. Where is Ibycus? Where is Ibycus? It turned out he had been murdered. And Schiller uses this image of these Erinyes, and Helga can maybe describe them more, but these half like dreadful spirit creatures marching around the Colosseum, creating this incredible tension. And then the flock of cranes flies overhead, and someone in the crowd says, "Look, there, it's the cranes of Ibycus." And in so doing, of course, reveals that he was there at the murder and is therefore one of the killers and gives himself away. And so I think all of us have to work on keeping the faith in this principle of natural law, because the only thing that actually will prevent us from winning is ourselves giving that up. And the fact that this happened with this CNN historical jerk, that he has LaRouche on his mind, gives me a great deal of confidence that we can persevere, even though I think the days ahead are going to be difficult. There's going to be all kinds of things potentially occurring, all kinds of absurdities and confusion being sown by the media and the social media. But I think we have a higher idea, which has largely been expressed here today.
Thank you very much. What we want to do is go for, I just understand, I know that Helga probably has something to say about this too, but Representative Russ Diamond from Pennsylvania just called in and we want to put him up. There you are. Great.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
How are you?
Well, we're not doing too badly here. We're still in a United States of some kind of principle.
we certainly are. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my perspective as a state legislator here in Pennsylvania. I'm from Lebanon County, which is a very kind of a rural county, and I've been in the General Assembly for 6 years. So I just kind of want to give folks an idea of what the total picture here is in Pennsylvania. And it's great that this panel is called Truth and Reconciliation, because that's exactly what I have been focusing on from the beginning of this. For truth, first you need to have some standards. I mean, if you don't have standards that everyone is following, you can't end up at truth. So that's what I've been fighting against. And then when you want reconciliation, when I think of reconciling, I think of reconciling my checkbook. I have to freeze time. I have to know what money was supposed to be there, what money was out, what money was coming in, but I have to freeze time to do that. And that's the other thing I've been focusing on in Pennsylvania. Before we get there, I want to tell you how this entire saga has played out in Pennsylvania from the beginning. The very beginning of this saga was when the Jill Stein campaign sued the Commonwealth over the DRE machines that your first panelist talked about. We had DRE machines mostly in Pennsylvania where nobody had any kind of paper. So the Stein campaign sued the Commonwealth to get a voter verified paper trail, some kind of paper trail going on our voting machines. The governor, instead of letting that suit be played out, the governor unilaterally entered into a settlement agreement with the Stein campaign that they would decertify every single voting machine in Pennsylvania and have to recertify new systems for all 67 counties in Pennsylvania. When that happened, there were 9 systems that were certifiable in Pennsylvania. I believe there's 5 systems that are currently being used in Pennsylvania. One of them is Dominion, that's used in 14 counties. There's an ES&S system that we use here in my county. I know they use that system down in Philadelphia. Anyways, we got those new machines. We paid $90 million for all these new machines. Along the way, also, we passed a bill. We had a great negotiation with everybody in the Commonwealth to modernize Pennsylvania's election law. What you have to know about Pennsylvania is that we actually have a provision in our Constitution that requires us to have an absentee ballot system. And it spells out what you have to do in order to qualify for an absentee ballot. You can't physically be at the polling place, and that's the requirement for casting an absentee ballot. However, what we found over the years is those requirements are wholly unenforceable. I mean, imagine it. Imagine if we would haul into court every infirmed individual, every paraplegic, every person in a wheelchair, and to question them as to, well, why can't you be at the polling place? Well, look at me, it's kind of obvious. But it's been unenforceable for a long time. And folks were filing for absentee ballots and when they could have physically been at the polls. So that was unenforceable. So part of the big negotiation that we did to modernize Pennsylvania's law was to include no excuse absentee balloting. However, we didn't want to call it absentee balloting. We wanted to call it something separate so that it wouldn't fall under that constitutional provision. So we created no excuse absentee ballot or no excuse mail-in balloting. And that was through Act 77 in Pennsylvania. Now, along with that, we included many, many security features for that because we knew that any expansion of that kind of system would be an invitation to some sort of irregularity. Now, I don't use the term voter fraud because I think that's kind of on the retail end of things, whereas the problems I've been focusing on is more on the wholesale side of things that happened before and during the election that created an invitation to these sort of irregularities. So that's what I've been focusing on. And then we saw, we passed Act 77, it became law. But as soon as it became law, we saw agents, non-legislative agents, trying to undermine the security features of that law and to just like open it up wide. In the primary election, a few counties got this idea that, well, we don't need to accept these by mail. We can put this drop box on the corner, on a street corner somewhere and let people just put their things in there. Well, that's kind of not in the spirit of the law, where you have a polling place, where you have watchers from each party, and people are observing it. So a number of counties had these drop boxes during our primary election without authorization by the law. The governor during the primary election waived the deadline for receiving mail-in ballots. It didn't have any authority to do that. He did that under an executive order based on the COVID crisis. So after the primary election, we knew in the legislature with any kind of new voting system, we would have to do some tweaks, fix it, make it better, even despite the fact that we added more security in than our old absentee ballot system had. But immediately we saw pushback on that. We saw more undermining of that. We had the drop boxes got proliferated, and that was aided by $350 million that was spread all over the country, mostly in swing states, by Mark Zuckerberg through his, I think it's called the Center for, I forget what the 503C is that it was called, but they were giving private grants to fund public elections, which we thought was a problem. I filed a lawsuit. I was a plaintiff in a lawsuit against that. That lawsuit got tossed. We saw our Supreme Court eliminate the need for signature matching, which treats mail-in balloting differently than in-person balloting, where you got to match that signature at the polling place, but not for mail-in ballots. We saw our Supreme Court say, well, it doesn't need to be in on time. You can wait, it doesn't have to be in by 8 p.m. on election day. And that's not an interpretation of the law, which is rightfully what the court should do. That's actually changing the law. And that's not the rightful place for the courts to act. We saw the governor offer free postage for everybody. You don't have to put a stamp on it. It's a prepaid envelope. We saw the courts say, well, it doesn't even have to be postmarked. We saw the courts also say, well, filling out all those things on the outside envelope really doesn't matter either. We're just going to take all comers. We're going to pay for it. And, whatever mail-in ballots we got. So that was my focus on this. I know immediately after the election, we started hearing about all this, potential retail voter fraud. And I'm talking about dead voters, fake mail-in ballots, all that sort of thing. And I watched all the hearings, including the hearing that Leah was at in Gettysburg, and I watched them with great interest. But no one ever put any of the real evidence of any of that into our hands as the legislature. And that concerned me a lot because as the state legislature, according to the US Constitution, we have full authority, plenary authority over a presidential election. When it comes to my own election, our state courts have every right to get involved and say what's fair and what's not. But in a presidential election, the state courts have no role. The state executive branch have no role. The state legislature is the final authority on what's legal for a presidential election. And I learned that through Dr. John Eastman's testimony before the Georgia Senate, when he said, look, you don't need any evidence of this retail voter fraud simply because you had non-legislative actors changing the law in a presidential election. That's basis enough for the state legislature to step in and do something about that state's presidential electors. I believed at that time that we did not have enough evidence, and we still don't have enough evidence to say with all finality which candidate won. We just don't. I couldn't tell you that Trump won Pennsylvania. I couldn't tell you that Biden won Pennsylvania because on the reconciliation end, we don't have that static checkbook that's frozen in time where we can say, okay, here's what happened on election day. Here's all the registered voters. Here's all the people who voted. And we found that out a few weeks after the election. I believe it was mid-December when we tried to reconcile official county results with the voter data that is in Pennsylvania's SURE system, S8 or S-U-R-E, and that stands for Statewide Unified Registry of Electors. And that's where all the voter data goes. And you can go and you can download that. You can look at who voted when, what method they voted by, what party they were registered under. It's all the records for every voter in the Commonwealth. So that wasn't matching up. We found a 205,000 total vote discrepancy between ballots cast and counted and voters who voted. And then in the presidential race, we found 170,000 quantity discrepancy between ballots cast and counted and voters who voted. And we thought, because the presidential race was decided by 80,000 votes here in Pennsylvania, 170,000 is a lot to talk about. Now, not all counties were done uploading their data to the SURE system. But what we found is there is no static, frozen in time checkbook for us to reconcile the results of the election against when it comes to total ballots cast and counted versus total voters voting. That's tough to say. It's sort of a tongue tie. So that's where we've been at in Pennsylvania. And again, I'll reiterate that I have never gone to the argument of there was total voter fraud in Pennsylvania. What? Because that's the retail stuff, and nobody's ever put the evidence of that in my personal hands. But I can say that our law was absolutely violated and undermined in Pennsylvania by non-legislative actors. And after the fact, we still cannot, on a one-to-one basis, totally reconcile our quote-unquote checkbook. So that's been the problem for me. As a result of all that activity, I filed resolutions in the House of Representatives to claw back our presidential electors, to name new presidential electors in case Congress got to the point where they directed us to do that. Earlier than that, I had filed a resolution not just claiming that the certification of Pennsylvania's presidential election was done far too soon, and asking for a review of all. We had 4 statewide races on the ballot this year: the president, the auditor general, the attorney general, and the state treasurer. So we did that as well. But frankly, the clock ran out. The clock ran out on us because the legislature was actually not in session. On November 30th, our previous session ended, and we weren't getting sworn in until January 5th, the day before Congress counted the votes. So that's where I've been at here in Pennsylvania. We still have lots of questions. I'm a member of the State House Government Committee here in Pennsylvania, and we are about to launch on lots of hearings and fact-finding missions with our Department of State, with our county election officials. We're going to try and track down all these questions that we have. I mean, we've got sheets and sheets of questions, and we've already gotten some response from the Department of State. Thursday, we're going to be having a hearing with them. But we have hearings scheduled all throughout the spring to try to get to the bottom of this, because the bottom line is this: if you want truth and reconciliation, you have to have standards to find truth, and to reconcile something, you need to have a static, frozen in time checkbook to reconcile. That's what we, and the underlying principle here is that faith in governance depends on faith in the systems which populate those governments. So if we don't have faith in the vote, our entire constitutional republic is very much threatened. Because once you lose that faith, you're going to lose faith in every other activity that the government undertakes. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me on here. I'd be glad to stick around and answer any questions.
Well, what's going to happen, Representative, and we want to thank you very much, Representative Russ Diamond, is that we're going to go back, because we've had a whole entire program, and I want to have the founder of the Schiller Institute, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, sort of at this point give any comments she has on all or any element of what she's heard. And then we're going to follow that. We have some people already in our queue at Zoom who have several questions, or have comments actually also, and more than comments, a few actual additions. So Helga, if you have some thoughts at this point.
Oh, well, this was so much very fascinating information, history. It warmed my heart to see all of these people, like Wade Watts and Bevel and Amelia. But apart from that, I think, what the legislator just said in the end, that the constitutional republic is threatened. I think that's really the thing, because, I mean, what the digital oligarchs did in banning the social accounts of President Trump, I mean, that should be an alarm bell for anybody. And, even Merkel and Le Maire, the French finance minister, they objected. And even the people who are, not exactly the most progressives, they have taken note to the fact that, if you give private companies the ability to basically make somebody a non-person, I mean, this is a super threat. However, I mean, and I want to put this back to Leah Hoops and the other people who spoke on this later part of the program. The thing which mind-boggled me in an incredible way is that you had all of this incredible information, because we had several of such shows now. And, then if you look at the international media, at least in Europe, the line is always, that Trump did not present a single shred of evidence that there was an election fraud. And you would think that there would be some investigative journalists somewhere, or some elected politicians who would say, okay, if there are so many state legislators and so many eyewitnesses who are reporting irregularities, maybe we should have an independent investigation and go and look. But nothing, to my knowledge, of this sort has happened. So I'm wondering if one cannot think of, some kind of an outreach where the people who have these reports would somehow make an initiative to contact legislators in other countries and invite them to come and take a look. Because, even if this election, is in all likelihood now unreversible, because, we're 2 days away from the inauguration, but the problem remains. And, I think the very existence of the United States as a republic is at stake. So my question back to all of those who spoke, what can be done, to invite people from other countries to at least start to think about it and look at it, because the media all says no shred of evidence.
What we're going to do at this point is, I see Steve's putting his hand up, but I want to now ask maybe, actually, Steve, you want to respond, and I want to then go to Lynn Landis, who I think is up there. Is that you, Lynn? I think that's you. Yes, it is you. Great. Because she and I have been having some conversations on precisely this direction of what can be done. So, Steve, I'll give you a chance just to respond, and then we'll go right to Lynn.
Yeah, as a couple of the other people have pointed out, I mean, it's incredibly frustrating. We can't have anything to say. The center has fallen out. And regarding Helga's last point, that I've actually reached out to people in Europe and said, "Is there any place I can publish this stuff? I can't publish anything anywhere now." Even on social media, we get it stamped, Facebook stamps. This is disputed. It's unacceptable because it's a disputed idea. That's just shocking, or it's missing context. So, I have reached out, and even in Europe, I mean, it seems as though maybe a Russian publication, but so if anyone in Europe is seeing this and has any idea where we can publish, please share.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Lynn.
Yeah.
Can we go to Lynn, and then
Sure.
I understand Representative Diamond apparently is waving in the background, so we'll go to you first, Lynn.
Well, thank you for having me. And Steve Freeman and I have been involved in this subject since 2000, really. And so this has gone on for 20 years. But I do want to say that the disappearance of transparency in these elections started 160 years ago with the introduction of the absentee ballot. And then with the introduction of the secret ballot, they became anonymous, speaking about audits and standards and reconciliation. We're reconciling anonymous ballots, really. So that's a huge problem, frankly. And that just was introduced in 1880, and then in 1890, the voting machines. So this has been a long time in coming. This just hasn't been the last 20 years or even the last 60 years. It's been the last 160 years. So what to do? Because as Dr. Freeman said, that the people who've benefited from this system are highly unlikely to want to change it. And for many years, we knocked on the doors, spoke across the country to the public and to political leaders of both parties, and they had no interest in changing this process. So the question is, what can you tell voters to do? Now, back in 2006, I think it was, we did have some what we call parallel elections in certain precincts. And some of it happened in California, Florida. I did one in my poll where we asked voters to go public with their vote so we could do some sort of real audit of how people voted, which was very interesting, But another thing to think about is to instruct, advise voters not to vote early, not to vote absentee, not to vote by mail or drop box, but to go to the ballot on election day and ask for a provisional ballot and not vote on the machines, because there's no such thing as a transparent machine. So all of these things, these conveniences we've incorporated into the voting system really are the fraud. This is de facto fraud. So we really don't have to prove fraud. The system is the fraud. And you know, it would be great if the state legislature would take those steps and change the state laws, but it hasn't happened. If it does, that's great. But otherwise, the word has to go out to the voter to refuse to use the machines, to refuse to use these conveniences that have completely corrupted the system. So that's what we need, is a concrete message for voters. They don't want to be told to keep voting when the vote is so corrupt, it's so fraudulent.
Good. Let's go to Representative Diamond and then to Leah, because I see Leah's got her hand up too. But it's just the order.
Thank you so much. There was one thing that Helga just kind of brushed on that I wanted to just circle back on. She said, well, it's, I don't know if you said it's too late or you said we're 2 days away from the inauguration. I just wanted to tell you folks that it's never too late to right a wrong. And I would point to a case here in Pennsylvania, I believe it's 1994, Stinson v. Marks, where there's a gentleman named Marks who won a special election for the state Senate here in Pennsylvania. And he was sworn into office. He took office. He was voting as a senator. And later, a federal court determined that they had cheated enough on the Marks team that Mr. Marks was removed as a state senator. And his challenger, Bruce Stinson, then became the state senator to fill out the rest of that term. The reason I bring that out is because there is still a case before the United States Supreme Court. It's called Trump v. Bookvar, that raises all the things that I have been fighting for. The lead attorney on that is Dr. John Eastman, who gave me the idea that we as the General Assembly have plenary authority over presidential elections. And his co-counsel on that case is none other than Bruce Stinson of Stinson versus Marks. So I just want to bring that up. It's never too late to right a wrong.
Leah?
So I've actually met Russ very briefly at the HRCC event. So it's good to see you again, Russ, and thank you for what you have done for Pennsylvania. I want to just discuss very, very briefly about it's very hard to hear that constantly that there's no evidence, there's no evidence, there's no evidence. No, there is evidence. We actually had, in our county alone, we actually got 2 private investigators who are ex-FBI agents who helped us out. And because nobody in my local county or even the people that I had gone to in the state legislation had even offered any kind of help into investigating. Russ, I haven't gone specifically to you because you're not my representative. But I have gone to, I also sat in front of the Senate committee and was not offered any kind of help even after I testified in front of an entire committee. I also went to the Joint State Government Commission, which I know has an advisory board. I have spoken to, countless people. I've reached out to Jake Corman, Kerry Benninghoff. I have reached out to, Doug Mastriano. There are plenty of people that I've reached out to and have begged for help in this investigation into my county alone. I could literally hand over on a silver platter what we have, and I feel it has fallen upon deaf ears, which is unfortunate. But in all honesty, I don't feel that it is my responsibility to provide that investigation when I know that the legislation has the power to not only subpoena, but they also have the power to investigate. And the last thing I want to bring to the attention is that Act 77 is completely unconstitutional. We all know it, and I know that the citizens will be asking for it to be repealed completely. There's a multitude of things that I could go on about, but in all honesty, I think what the problem is at this point within our government is that things are done things are done very quickly, and they are kind of an afterthought as to what could happen. And especially we're seeing that with Act 77. I think there should have been a very, very intensive investigation, consulting with fraud examiners, consulting with, a multitude of people that I've been able to talk to, people from the Army Corps of Engineers, data forensic scientists who would have been able to look at Act 77 and rip it apart and talked about mail-in ballots, and how it exposes, our elections to fraud. So, yeah, I just know moving forward that we're going to be holding people, we're going to be holding the feet to the fire, especially when it comes to the legislation. So I would love to talk to whoever it is that I possibly could talk to in legislation and provide them with my evidence. I would be more than happy to do that if I could get a voice or an action. Thank you. Thank you, refs.
Okay, very good, very good. So I think, Diane, you have a question that came in, and we're starting to, I should also say, questions at schillerinstitute.org is where you go, and we can take some other questions. There are a couple of others, and there's one other person, I think, waiting in the queue. So we'll just go to your question first, Diane, then to the queue, and then ask if there's responses from the panel.
Okay. This is from someone named Andre online who writes, "Good afternoon. Can anyone on the panel please address the current status of pardons for Mr. Snowden and Mr. Assange? Also, any ideas on the exoneration of LaRouche? Thank you."
Okay, well, why don't we ask Helga if you have something to say about that first?
Well, the only thing I have read and heard is that supposedly tomorrow President Trump is going to announce 100 persons to be pardoned. And there are rumors that Assange and Snowden are supposed to be part of it. I don't know if that is true. I would very much hope that it includes my husband, because I think for all the reasons, we have discussed in many occasions, if you want to change the system, if you want to turn over the table, because the problem is that always people react to the one thing which affects them. But I think, if you look at the totality of what is happening, especially, the danger of dictatorship on all opinion with the big tech companies, which I still think is one of the most worrisome questions, I think we need to really think in getting rid of this entire apparatus which is behind that, because it's obviously an ingrained problem, and there are many ways how one can describe it: deep state, military industrial complex, powers to be, Wall Street, British Empire. All of these obviously describe an aspect of what we are dealing with, because these things don't fall from the heaven. They're not, they're not just some local problem. This is a really big, deep-seated problem. And if you want to go back to a republic in the United States, then I think that which prevents the United States from being a republic must be corrected. And for that, the exoneration of my late husband, in my view, is the absolute key. So I would hope that Trump has the vision and courage to do exactly that. And if not, we will keep on the fight. But I think this is an incredible opportunity. So let's see what happens tomorrow.
Okay, fine. Diane, you have anything on that, or should we just continue? No. Okay. There is another person on the Zoom who I think had either a question or a comment, and then I'm going to ask, by the way, Mr. Soto to make a comment after the Zoom person. So I want to make sure the translators are ready for that. He may have some things to say. So can we go to the next person in Zoom, or is that person not there? Okay, so let me just say one other thing in response to this issue of the the Assange and Snowden matter, and also just something because I see a lot of people on from Pennsylvania, where I also come from, and the question about what can be done, I think, is very important. Many of us have been trying to get the attention, not only of the President of the United States, but of the American people to understand that what happened there with Edward Snowden in particular, who, after all, was not even against the war in Iraq. He was working for Central Intelligence Agency first, then he was working for NSA after that. He certainly was not any kind of political radical. It was only after a series of years of experience of various forms of violations that he experienced himself and saw himself, that he came to the conclusion that he had to act. And he recognized that he was going to be acting outside of the law. And that was because some of his predecessors, William Binney, for example, particularly from the National Security Agency, had tried to go through the law. I mean, they had tried to actually indicate the various violations, some of which they thought were lethal, especially as that pertained to the conditions around the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, et cetera. And because Snowden was moved by conscience, he chose to act in a way that he knew was unlawful for a higher law. And so I think it's important to note that because some of those, including people in the intelligence community, will tell you, and some of them now no longer privately, that they consider him to be a hero because of what he did. And it's sort of a good case to take because of what Leah Hoops referenced to us before, that she finds herself in a circumstance in which people are trying to vilify her and castigate her. And I think that's also true of Kathy Latham as well. You've got this arbitrary charge of white supremacy being now labeled on all sorts of people. As a matter of fact, even one could say even millions of people. And in this sort of circumstance, honestly, it's a bit like the problems of the America of the 1950s and 1960s. So I think when we think about this idea of what can be done, the idea was a citizens' commission for truth in elections, and that this idea of truth and reconciliation being taken up by each of those citizens or as a community is, I think, essential. I think it's the kind of thing that we need all over the United States. And I think that just as we go forward here now in the discussion, I think it's sort of useful that, Pennsylvania, of course, has been a lot of the focus for obvious reasons, but it's also the location of the assembly that created both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. And so I think as we're sort of thinking through, as we're sort of coming into a kind of conclusion, there's a few other questions, a few other people have written in. I just thought people might want to think about referencing those of you who've seen the whole of what we've done, and those of you who are listening, if you have other questions and other ideas, you can get in touch with us also through the Schiller Institute website. So there are a couple of questions I've received, and I'm going to let, I guess I want to ask one question. This is from Mexico. It says, well, actually, I'm going to do this. There's two questions. So one of them is Mexico and the other I'm not sure. It says, sincerely greeting you as a follower of the development proposals promoted by the Schiller Institute. This is a question, I guess this is mainly for you, Helga. What type of financing do you recommend in order to carry out the construction of development corridors and the creation of a national bank? They're asking basically about the idea of what can be done to think about a solution. Okay, here's what is the solution from a policy standpoint to the kind of crisis that we find ourselves in, expressed in these elections, both in the United States and around the world? Okay, so that's a question, Helga, that's directed at you. And then after that, I guess we'll go to Mr. Soto.
Well, I think that the effects of the lockdowns, the pandemic, look at Great Britain. They're just reporting that the health system in Great Britain is completely overwhelmed. there are all these mutations and so forth. I think that the idea that with the vaccines, the COVID-19 crisis is somehow over, I think this is really a wrong idea, because a pandemic is a pandemic because it's global. And I have said many times that until every single country on this planet has a modern health system with hospitals, with intensive care units, with educated personnel, this virus is mutating, and there are many health experts who are warning that new viruses are already on the horizon for new pandemics. So I think mankind has reached a point where either we overcome the underdevelopment of the developing sector, starting with a modern health system in every single country, or we will go into a prolonged dark age, with unforeseeable consequences. All of this will also bring about the fact that the Green New Deal, which is now being pushed in Europe, and probably if Biden comes in, the Biden administration is committed to, this will be an attack on the industrial state. It will lead to a collapse of the living standard. The social, ferment, which already is now, incredibly big, it will get bigger, because you cannot lower the living standard of people who are already at the end of not able to make ends meet. So we are looking at a period of incredible challenges. More people will wake up that this system does not work. And therefore, the solutions, what Lyndon LaRouche has proposed, to have a Glass-Steagall, a global banking separation, to have a global system of national banking, and go for a new Bretton Woods system as an international credit system for reorganizing and restarting the world economy, creating 1.5 billion new productive jobs. I think that is something which will be upfront. And I think that it's important that the election situation, in a sense, that I think it will be very important to educate people about it, to make sure that many people are going to be the guarantee that this never happens again. But I think the underlying reason why all of this is happening needs to be remedied too. So therefore, I think that we should look at this present year of 1921 as a period where I don't think the plans of the oligarchy can function, simply because we will see more and more that ideology is absolutely crashing against reality. Reality is we have more than 7 billion people, and if there is a concerted effort to reduce that population through these green policies, I think we are looking at a world revolution. And I think the only way how we can avoid chaos is that many good people have to be united for the plan how to remedy it with a new world economic order in the way I just described.
Thank you. Mr. Soto, we hadn't given you a chance to respond at all, so if you have anything at this point you'd like to say.
Los testimonios son extraordinarios y quería resaltar la señorita Lynn Land.
The statements that have been really extraordinary. And the comments that were made, especially that this goes back 160 years ago, I would like to say, as a non-North American, not American, but as a student and admirer of the US Constitution, the Constitution comes from the glorious American Revolution, has created a federal republic. And the essence of this is seen in Articles 1 and 2 after the preamble of the Constitution, is that the states that make up this most perfect union, as the preamble states, have a responsibility which cannot be delegated to the federal authorities, and this has to do especially with the electoral laws. Therefore, I think that American citizens have to think in terms of they have the best or one of the best constitutions in the history of humanity. And this has been a model for many of the republics of the Americas. And we and they have to return to the principles of the Constitution. It said, as this establishes respect for natural law within positive law. And this architecture is ratified and strengthened in the electoral laws of each and every one of the states, based on a secret vote and so on. But then you have electronic voting with lack of transparency, or as has been discussed here, with the problems that have arisen. And therefore, I think that the Constitution itself of the United States is the point of unity of the American citizens, and with the enormous strength that your hundreds of millions of people have based on the principles of the Constitution. And this is the solution that's required. And every single state should therefore take up the issues of the electoral votes. I think this is a question of universal justice. We have people in Latin America who have looked into these matters. There's questions where laws are not applied correctly and cases are unjust, therefore they have to be corrected. And I believe that on the level of the state laws, this is where, based on due process, with hearings, appealing to the citizenship to create a good electoral system. Excuse me for being so audacious as to talk to you about this, but I think that this is extremely important. I wish you the very best of success in finding as a point of unity your great Constitution.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You have something, Steve? Or you just, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to just follow up on a point that Helga has made a couple times, and that is kind of this big tech dystopia we're entering into. There's a couple points. I mean, people are outraged about the censorship, justifiably. They're not sufficiently outraged, but there's a couple points that are clearly like hypocritical or lies in what they're doing. And one of them is, well, first of all, the reason why they had entered upon all the censorship was supposedly to provide more trust in the system. They wanted to counter all the supposed fake news that was raising questions about election security. And if there's ever been a more less successful campaign, I can't imagine one. I don't think they persuaded anybody with all their, rhetoric and fact checking and et cetera about this. All they did was make everybody much more hardened. The 75 million people who voted for Trump, over 75% of them not only do they not believe the results, they're convinced that Trump actually won. So they've turned, the kind of solid small business owners and, average people who make up the Republican Party, they've turned them all into enemies of the state, so to speak. And then the second point about that is that when they were testifying in Congress earlier in 2020, about have they become too powerful a monopoly? They said, well, anybody could set up an alternative, right? There's nothing stopping anyone from setting up an alternative. Well, Parler did that. And Amazon and Apple shut it down. I mean, you have 4 people with this just incredible degree of power as to what can be said in this country and can't. The presidents of Apple, Google, Facebook, and well, there's Twitter too, but Amazon owns Washington Post, which is probably the second or third most influential paper in the country. So just didn't want that point to be lost. I thought Helga had made it twice, and I think that's something that has to be a part of any discussion on truth in elections.
Yeah, I'd like to go now to Greg Witherspoon, who is there. He's from East St. Louis, and I know he was a candidate for office down in Texas, probably before anybody else on the panel was even born. And he may have some comments to make since he has worked with us for a long time. I'll put it like that. He actually knew most of the people who were in the black and white film with me. So, Greg, you're on. If you have either a question or a comment, go right ahead.
Yeah, I have two. I'll keep it relatively short. It's beautiful seeing everybody who was thus far uh, brought wisdom and understanding to the situation that we see and all the chaos we see. I would say that this grants us a wonderful opportunity from a standpoint of having a more perfect union and this idea of the coincidence of the opposite. Again, there are 70 plus million Americans who voted for the president, and then there were many who voted for the president who didn't get counted for voting for the president. But more importantly, I think, is that these people now have the opportunity to actually become a part of the government. I think one of our jobs will be to kind of get those people to understand the need and the necessity for them to begin to move towards running for public office, and then to equip them of what it means to be in such a public office so that they don't get absorbed as many others have gotten absorbed once they went in with good intentions. And so with that kind of thought in mind, I just want to say, again, thank everybody for your energy, for your time. And look, we're not probably not in an enviable position, if you will, but we're in a good position. You know that we're in that spot where arrogance will kick in to the enemy. They will begin to relish and bathe in their own stupidity, and we just have to be ready to be able to forge forward. And again, I think each of us need to be looking for someone to be able to develop, to be able to take part in this in our government in a very specific way. And I think that's going to grant us a big opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Greg. We're going to start to wind down now and ask people to sort of think about summary remarks they'd like to make, or for that matter, just whatever you think has not been addressed that you'd like to address here. Some persons have had to go. For example, Representative Diamond's not with us now, but I'd like to turn to the panelists and just begin to get if you will, anything that you want to convey that you think either hasn't been said or that you just would like to say before we leave. So why don't we start with you, Steve?
Yeah, well, I've been pretty much saying as what I needed to say as the time came. I would just ask people if they could sign our petition about transparency in elections. It's at electionintegrity.org. And any other thoughts on these matters? But thank you very much for doing this program and for inviting me to participate.
Thank you very much. Leah, how about you?
Just once again, it's just always a pleasure to be a part of this panel. I would just advise people to really try to start to inform yourselves, get involved in local elections, reach out to your legislatures, and just start to really get yourself involved in your elections. Understand, what a poll worker is, what a poll watcher is. Become one of those people, and really indulge yourself into the system and understand it. The only way that they can really pull the wool over our eyes is when we're uninformed. So I mean, I think we really need to just get back to having civil discourse. It just keeps on coming up every panel that I do, and every time I talk to somebody. Just we really have to focus on unity and being able to talk about this stuff and not resorting to hate and vilifying people that want to bring out the truth. That's my main goal, is to bring out the truth. So thank you so much, and I say we just keep moving forward.
We want to thank you as well. Mr. Soto, any final remarks?
Ante todo, quiero agradecer. Es un
Above all, I
tremendo.
want to thank you. It's really an enormous honor to be able to participate here with you. I admire you greatly for the courage of all the citizens that have participated in this. I really appreciate Helga, Dennis, and the statements that have been made are extremely important for all of humanity because there are a tremendous amount of disinformation about the truth of the elections. And we have to tell the truth over and over again, as has been stated here, with serious testimony. And returning to the words of the last speaker, what Leah Hoop said, that there should not be a false breach between people in the United States and to not take recourse to violence. The point of unity has to be the great Constitution of the Federal Republic of the United States, which established principles of natural law universally. This can be solved without any more divisions than we already have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Diane?
I think two
I
things
think
I
you're
would
muted.
like to.
Okay. No, now you're fine. You're good now.
Okay. I would like to endorse what Helga has called for on past webcasts, which is that we have to extend the year of Beethoven at least until all the concerts that would have been held this year have occurred. She said at one point, until everyone thinks like Beethoven. That could be a very long time, or maybe I'm just being cynical, and it wouldn't take very long. But on that vein, I wanted to invite everyone here to join the Schiller Institute NYC Chorus, which is currently working on Beethoven's Missa Solemnis. And the rehearsals are on Zoom on the internet, so you don't have to travel. They're Thursday evenings, and you can find the information on the Schiller Institute website and the Chorus website. My second idea of what people can do is that we really have to fight to get Lyndon LaRouche exonerated, because it is criminal that a mind that was so productive and so brilliant and creative is not known by so many millions of Americans, that his works are not taught in the schools. And I think it's something, knowledge of him and getting to know his mind is part of what will restore people's faith in the goodness of the United States, that the United States could produce a genius like this because of the nature of the American Revolution. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Helga?
Well, I would like to return to the idea, or one idea what I mentioned in the beginning, and that is the quality of the sublime. Because, when you are in struggles, and I think, some people, Leah and others, expressed, that if you take such a struggle, you get all kinds of, obstacles against you. And the poem and the song Longing from Schubert had that exact idea, that you have a beautiful idea, and then you are trying to do something about it, and then you get all kinds of things thrown at you. And at that moment, what counts is that you really develop this sense of being morally secure. And that requires that you continuously develop your mind, that you develop your emotions, that you develop your character. I mean, Mahatma Gandhi was very much saying that, in order to get through the struggle, you have to continuously purify yourself. I mean, this was also an idea which Reverend Bevel, he would have many expressions for that, like you have to reset your computer and get all the bad stuff out. I mean, he had many ways of joking about it. But I think it's this quality of, inner determination to improve as a human being, which is what is required. Because I think that the wrongs in this process, what we discussed, are so many that I believe that it's not only one single thing which needs to be fixed, but we need a real cultural renaissance where, it's not that a system is being defended by people who have all the privileges of it, but that you have a society which again is a republic, because you have citizens who think like a republic. And I think that requires a cultural renaissance. And, going back to the ideals of the founding fathers, And only if such a cultural going back to, what the idea of the United States was, I think we will be successful.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody who joined us for the panel today. Steve Freeman, Dr. Soto, Leah Hoops, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and Diane Sayre, and all the others that also joined us who couldn't stay with us, which involved also Kathy Latham, Representative Rush Diamond, and all, of course, the people that asked the questions. And so we're going to conclude now. I just want to say something about what Leah referenced, actually, in her quote from Martin Luther King. It was a reference to the speech that he gave on April 3rd, 1968. It's generally referred to as the mountaintop speech. And what she was quoting from was the earlier section in which he's talking about somewhere I read. And he's referring, of course, to the American Constitution. He says, as people know, like anyone, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. Well, the promised land is actually exactly where you are, not in the sense that it's geographic, not in the sense that it is geopolitical either, not in the sense that it's material, but it's this ability to change from the inside out. Mahatma Gandhi, from whom we've referenced a few times, said in the beginning, the introduction of his stories of my experiments with truth, that he really didn't understand what people meant by his political acumen or his political achievements. He said because as far as he was concerned, those things were inconsequential. But what was really the thing that people needed to know was his experiments with truth and his ability and his intent to try to fight with himself and how many times he lost those battles. And that it was this fight with the self, with many times experiencing continually losing battles, that resulted in whatever it was that he found himself able to do to inspire anyone else to do anything. This is not merely a call for people to just look inside themselves, but there's one thing I'd like to state, which Reverend James Bevel often said, is that any problem that you find that you are confronting, that you find insoluble, that you somehow don't see there any solution for, requires you to take your 51% out of it. That is, any problem, you are putting 51% into the problem. And if you take that out, then you will suddenly see the solution. I think that tonight, throughout America, what people could do is they could, as the song goes, turn our hearts today to Martin Luther King and recognize the ties between us, all men and women living on the earth, ties of hope and love. That's a useful thing to think tonight and to consider, and think about the idea that on the Mall, in the Great Mall of Washington, where Marian Anderson sang in 1939, and then for inaugurations in 1957 and 1961, and then for that march where Dr. King sort of burst upon the world with the famous I Have a Dream speech, that mall tonight, occupied by so many troops, has on it the statue of Dr. King, and that Dr. King is in correspondence, if you will, with Abraham Lincoln as to what will become of our countrymen. I think that's where we find ourselves, but that's a question for everyone in the world. It's not because America is the center of the world, no. It's because the experiment, which was the American experiment, is a very important experiment that the world is watching. In 5 years, this country will celebrate its 250th anniversary if we get there. So the question is, are we going to get to the promised land, not of our 250th birthday, but of the promise that was always there and always meant, in the words of Dr. King, Abraham Lincoln, Benjamin Franklin, and many others. And so we want to thank everyone for participating today. We want you to think about what you've heard. Maybe this will help to change some axioms. Maybe that will help people to have the courage to change their axioms. And that is the means to find a way to a true presidency of the United States in which all of the citizens express their responsibility, not to a mere office, but a principle of self-government. Thank you, and that's our conclusion.